Hey guys, how are you all? Welcome back to my channel. Today we will see what if Naruto ice Zanpakutos Sasuke bashing. If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. Naruto stared into the crowd of people, chattering about happily congratulating their children for making genin, while she was stuck in the same loop. Over and over she failed, getting chance after chance. Sure, she had no clue how to mold chakra, or unlock it for that matter, but she had outstanding kenjutsu, rivaling even the strongest of swordsmen, and her taijutsu was highly developed. She brushed her hair back from her face. She didn't understand why she couldn't do it, but it was a part of life, she supposed. The only thing she could truly do was mold this weird energy in her body in many ways. She could do nearly anything with it when she had concentration. It was to a point that the only thing she honestly cared for anymore was the beautifully crafted katana strapped to her back. Its magnificent blue woven hilt and gold guard seemed highly expensive. It was however quite the piece of junk when she got it originally. Naruto let out one last sigh when she saw the golden locks of her father, along with her mother leaving the building with her brother. The better of the two in their eyes. They never really pay her any attention anymore anyways. Not even calling her for dinner. She was ignored in the house for having no talent. Maybe they will see what she will become one day. Naruto looked over herself for a moment. She wore a white waistcoat with black anbu pants and traditional wooden sandals. She had a black shirt underneath the waistcoat. As Naruto sat twirling one of her red locks between her fingers, a firm hand was placed on her shoulder. Hey Naruto, I know you are upset about the results of the test, but I and Iruka came to a decision to help you. Naruto's eyes grew wide as she turned to her teacher. I'll do it. Naruto was moving. Fast. Very fast actually. She had learned a couple years back when she was learning the use of the power inside her that if she surrounded her feet in the spiritual energy, she could step a large distance nearly instantly. And through practice, she has mastered it to a point that she can move up to 400 meters per second at max, putting her in mid to high Jonin speeds. Without it though is very different. To her back was a large scroll, held securely by a strap. She had been ordered to retrieve the scroll for extra credit, which would put her quickly in a good spot to get into the ninja program. She smiled as she landed into the clearing, sitting down with her blade on her lap. She checked the time, noticing she was 2 hours early. Sighing, she calmed her nerves and settled into meditation, opening her eyes back up to the frozen ice scape of her inner mind. She smiled as she spotted the beautiful figure of her Zanpakuto. Good evening Shirayuki-chan, how are you? The beautiful figure of the white-haired Zanpakuto smiled as she slowly kneeled down into a sitting position. It is nice to see you again. How have your studies been, Lady Naruto? Naruto frowned and sighed lightly. It has all been kinda bad. However, I had been given a chance to gain some extra credit in the form of some mild espionage and thievery. Naruto drew out her syllables slightly, enjoying the rather posh and royal speech with her highly respectful Zanpakuto. Shirayuki smiled. I am glad you have found a way to manage. But it is for the best. No one understands your power for now. I want you to train for some time longer before then to prepare yourself. Naruto nodded slowly. I understand, I will do all I can to conceal myself. But, do you think I could pick up my training in order to speed along that process? Shirayuki lowered her head for a few moments, then nodded to herself. If you follow all of my words and grow at the rate I figured, I suppose we could push it up some time. 3 months or so and we could have you ready. Naruto smiled. Yes, Yuki-chan, we can do this. Naruto cheered, though even with her being a bit louder than her usual tone, it was extremely quiet. Oh, seems I sense a bit of spiritual energy coming in. I will see you soon, Yuki-chan. I just have to speak to my sensei and go home. Of course, Lady Naruto. Have a wonderful evening. Shirayuki bowed her head with a smile on her face. Naruto breathed out slightly, her breath creating a very thin line of icy mist. She smiled at the mist and giggled. Her body temperature was much lower than normal. She stood up and waited for the closing in spiritual signal. And like that, one of her senseis burst through the trees. Though this was not the one she was waiting on. Oh hey Iruka-sensei, I got the scroll. Can I have my headband now? Iruka paused mid-syllable and asked, what do you mean, Naruto? Naruto put a hand on her hip. The extra credit you and Mizuki-sensei are giving me, steal the scroll and bring it here. Iruka's eyes widened as he quickly pointed at the scroll. Okay Naruto, do not give anyone that scroll. Just as Iruka was speaking, another voice made its voice known. Well, you figured me out, Iruka. I was kinda hoping this would be a silent affair, but who was I to hope? The white-haired man slowly looked over the two from the trees. But if you could give me that scroll, Naruto, I will let this all go easy. Naruto glared and drew her blade. Come and take it, if you would like to try. At that Mizuki raised an eyebrow, confused at how quickly she switched to defense mode. He quickly eyes Iruka for a moment. Drawing one of his large shuriken strapped to his back, he grinned. Alright, catch kid. With intense speed, he launched the shuriken at Naruto. She readied her blade and steeled herself, and just when she was about to knock the shuriken aside, she watched Iruka throw herself in front of the shuriken, blocking its path with his back. Naruto's eyes were wide in shock. As his body fell to her feet, she stared in disbelief. She could have stopped that. Why had he done that? She shook herself from her thoughts and redirected them at the strolling form of Mizuki, who was coming closer. You know, I kinda liked you. I was going to be so generous with you and let you live. But now you sealed your fate. I will end you along with that pathetic sensei of yours. Naruto slowly forced her brain into working order just to notice Iruka pass out due to his heavily bleeding wound. She lowered her head and thought on everything for a moment. What, are you too scared to move? Why don't I just end you then? As he swung with his second spinning shuriken, Naruto raised her blade, the shuriken clanging off of her blade and flying away. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to freeze to death? Perhaps slow came to mind, perhaps painful. Just so you know, it is painful, but it is not always slow. She held her blade out and slowly started rotating it. Dance! Soda no Shirayuki. As she rotated the blade, a long white ribbon formed on the butt of the sword. The hilt turned fully white as well as the guard. And like that she was at his throat. And acrobatically flipped over him. Spinning as she descended, she left a deep slash along his back. Before she even landed, he was already half frozen over. If only Iruka was not here, I could have made it more painful. Enjoy the afterlife. She slowly sheathed her blade, watching as his body was engulfed in ice before shattering with the click of her blade. Moving over to her sensei who protected her life, she shook him gingerly. Iruka-sensei, wake up. Wake up please. Slowly stirring from his slumber, he stared at the form of his student. He looked around for Mizuki before smiling at the scroll held in Naruto's hands. He reached behind his head and untied his headband. Here Naruto, you truly deserve it. Naruto smiled, happy at finally being able to lead her own life. To truly gain power. Naruto stared at the Hokage with her head bowed. Even if she was his daughter, she still gave him the utmost respect in his office, or anywhere for that point. He never acted as a father anymore, so she treated him as the Hokage. He seemed thoughtful on that fact and continued for a good few seconds. Think over that. He shook his head before he waved. I will allow you to keep the headband under the battlefield promotion clause. While it was a horrible trap set up by Mizuki and you managed to safely contain the scroll afterward, I will waive any crimes committed in that scenario. Dismissed. Naruto bowed and left the room, letting a misty sigh release. She hated being in a room with him. He was so cold to her. Naruto walked through the academy doors to her classroom. She looked over the seats as some people yelled at her for failing the test. She ignored them. She had the headband around her neck for a reason. Sitting down in the top left seat, she waited for team assignments with her hands in her lap. As the time ticked by, Iruka came into the room holding a clipboard. And like that started naming off teams. He ticked each one off as he went down in numerical orders before Kento Namikaze, Naruto Namikaze, and Sasuke Uchiha. Naruto then slowly thought of her team. She was honestly rather annoyed at her options. She got her brother, who is wholly entitled, rather weak and untrustworthy. Happy-go-lucky child with no experience. He did have a good chakra pool, some minor skills with his Kyuubi chakra and a few jutsu. Sasuke, highly entitled as well. Bratty and annoying but quiet most of the time. He did have remarkable taijutsu and ninjutsu. So in total, close range from Naruto, mid-range from Sasuke and mixed from Kento. Naruto kept to herself in her little bubble. The classroom trickled away until only her and her teammates were left. And like that, hours ticked on. With Naruto in her little bubble of thought thinking of different strategies for maximum synergy. Before it was all blown out the window 2 hours later when she realized that her brother was a snob towards her for her weakness, and Sasuke basically hated everyone. Naruto let out a sigh as she leaned back to relax. She had been too tense with all the Mizuki things going about. Just as Naruto was falling back into her bubble, she heard the door open, and a silver-haired man walks through the doors. He took a quick look around the room before speaking. My first impression of you three, downers. Roof in 5 go. And like that he disappeared in a blur. Kento turned to tell her to come on only to see her blur away. She wanted to conceal her powers, yes, but she could take certain liberties when it came to general techniques. Naruto stared into her sensei's eye, working through everything she knew about him. He usually spoke to Kento and rarely spoke to her. She only knew his reputation, some bits of his likes and dislikes. And she knew that he favored teamwork and friends far over the rules and regulations. She glanced over at the doors to the roof to see her brother and Sasuke walking over to her seat. Neither said a word in front of their sensei, hoping to get more information on how to act. Kakashi just smiled. Well, his eyes smiled really. Well, now that we are all here, let's get on with introductions. Likes, dislikes, dreams for the future. Kento gave him a weird look. And why don't you go first, sensei? Kakashi simply sighed and snapped his book closed. Well, my name is Kakashi. My likes. You are far too young. Dislikes. And dreams. You first, Dark Sunshine. Sasuke looked annoyed at his admission of information but sighed. Sasuke Uchiha. I don't particularly like anything and I dislike most everything. What I have is not much of a dream but an ambition. I will revive my clan and slay a certain someone. Kakashi let out an internal groan. Revenge complex. Going to have to stomp that real quick, or direct it into another place. Alright, you next, Blondie. Kento glared at him half-heatedly. Kento Namikaze, I like rock gardens and sushi. I hate dango and sweets in general, and my dream for the future is to follow my father's footsteps to be the Hokage. Kakashi nodded, a bit relieved he had one normal kid at the very least. And with a drive like that, I have no doubt he will take the mantle someday. You next, Snow White. Naruto rolled her eyes. Naruto Namikaze, I like the cold. Kakashi raised an eyebrow. That it? Naruto simply stayed quiet. Oh great, another ice queen. Maybe we can break her out of her shell. Though she was so happy when she was younger. Alrighty then. Meet me tomorrow at Training Ground 7 and don't eat, you will just throw it up afterward. And like that he blurred away. Naruto stood and before her teammates could say a word she like their sensei blurred away. Naruto let out a sigh. She looked around at the trees. The scent of the forest calming her. She let a smile grace her pale features as she drew her blade. Let's start then, Yuki-chan. She took a deep breath then exhaled, slowly turning her blade counterclockwise as she spoke. Dance, Soda no Shirayuki. And as she turned her blade, the hilt turned white as well as a ribbon extended from the hilt. Now, simply go as long as you can before you drop. This way you can expend your spiritual pressure as well as garnering experience. Just limit the first dance. Pillars reaching the heavens are not very inconspicuous. Naruto smiled and nodded. Alright, until I drop Got it. Naruto walked slowly into the training ground. Her coat fluttering in the fine slightly. She had woken up 2 hours later than normal but figured she would be on time. She let out a light yawn as she strolled up to her teammates. She opted out of the conversation and hopped up on the tree branch in a quick leap, letting herself comfortingly nuzzle into the nook of the tree. It only took an hour for their sensei to arrive, making Naruto realize she was still early. She let out a very slight yawn and hopped down from the tree. Kento rolled his eyes while Sasuke stood with his hands in his pockets. Kakashi smiled at them all and held up 2 bells. You guys ready for some survival training? They all half-heartedly stared at him, making him sweat drop. Just slightly. Ah, okay, how about this? Whoever doesn't get a bell goes back to the academy. At that, they all sparked up a bit and stared at him a bit straighter of spine. Still no words though. Good enough, I guess. You have until noon. Starting. He glanced at a little timer which he quickly turned the knob on. Now. Both Sasuke and Kento dashed to the brush while Naruto walked towards Kakashi, hand on her blade's hilt. Kakashi raised an eyebrow. I heard about your kenjutsu skills. Impressive from what I hear, but this would probably be less painful for you if you acted like a ninja and not a samurai. Naruto rolled her eyes as she slowly drew her blade. You know what I think? I think this is all a big bluff. Never in the history of Konoha has there ever been a two-man genin cell. Threes are always a constant. So that takes a little steam from your engine there. And as well as your famously known teamwork emphasis, I can see why this test is put in place. However, none of my teammates like me or would ever understand that because their faculties are either over-absorbed or too short-sighted. So in total, my only chance is to simply do all I can to get a bell in hopes I can pass into the general shinobi regimen, or hope that my team will come and help of their own volition. Kakashi's eye widened slowly as she spoke. Her blade was readied and both of her hands were gripped onto the hilt loosely. I see, well, try it if you like. Naruto breathed in deeply and exhaled slowly before she took a single step and was at his throat. Kakashi, surprised, jumped back and lashed out at her. Naruto moved her head to the left away from his now drawn kunai and clashed it with her sword. She quickly twisted underneath the kunai and slashed at his midsection, making him jump back again. She blurred forward again, aiming for the strings at his belt. Kakashi quickly parried the blade and attempted to retaliate. Naruto quickly saw the attack coming, and before the blade could connect she was behind him, and like that her blade a mere flash of silver as a single one of the strings were cut. She slammed her foot into his spine, sending him careening forward into a roll as she picked up the bell. All of this was done in the span of 10 seconds, and Naruto kept her face impassive, staring at the now recovered Kakashi. You see, sensei, you underestimated me and held back horribly. If you would have fought me as well as you could have, I would not have retrieved that bell. She sat down next to a tree and sheathed her blade. Please try to pop that bubble of superiority of my teammates. It will make it very difficult to interact otherwise. Kakashi sighed slowly. Fine, I will give you this once. Enjoy the freebie. And like that he blurred away, in search of the two others on the team. Naruto let out a sigh as she ran her hand over the blade's sheath. Sorry for the rough handling, Yuki-chan. It's fine, not like it hurts, just a bit shaky. Thank you, Yuki-chan. Naruto relaxed against the tree, waiting for her team to fail miserably. She had no doubts that Kakashi was holding back heavily. He may have been getting a bit weaker over the peacetime, but he was still no pushover. Even with Yuki, she would not be able to beat him yet. And like that she could feel a larger spiritual pressure and two very tiny and weaker ones. Moments later, Kakashi drops in front of the 3 posts, tying the 2 to the posts. As soon as he had finished the knot on the second post, he turned to her. I'll admit they really are short-sighted when it comes to these things. You guys are lucky I am passing you guys due to a favor. Naruto nodded. Thank you, Kakashi-sensei. I hope we can all get along through time. Kakashi's eyes smiled at her. I hope so too, but I do wonder, how did you become that good with a sword? And on top of that, learn and perfect the shunshin? Naruto gently drew her fingers through her shoulder-length silver locks, and gently blew the one ever-present strand on her face to the other side of her nose. Well, my kenjutsu skills are self-taught. I formed it over a few styles I have seen and created techniques. Actually, Yuki-chan taught me the right way to wield her. And the shunshin is actually pure speed. I kick my feet extremely fast in order to create a teleportation-like an effect. Well, it is true, just amplified. I need a name for it though. Maybe one day it will be faster than Father's Hireishin. Wait, I got it. Shunpo. Flash step is perfect. Single quote. Kakashi frowned through his mask. I thought it looked different. Did your parents not teach you anything? Naruto raised an eyebrow. Of course not. I am far too weak for my parents to notice me. Kakashi scrunched up his face. So, she was never traditionally trained and she became this strong. I see then. She is prodigal in her field but not experienced in others. I hear she lacks the ability to use chakra, yet she continues to push her body to its limit. I am honestly impressed. Kakashi smiled lightly. Well, I will be sure to work off of your skills as best I can. Slowly he heard the two start to stir awake from their positions. Ah, looks like you two failed. Kento's eyes widened as he started barking out. No way my loser sister could get a bell, Kakashi. She obviously cheated in some way. Sasuke simply glared at Kakashi. Kakashi glared at Kento. Your loser sister managed to hold her own against me and remove the bell with pure skill in a matter of seconds. You managed to block one kick. And even then that was not the point of this test. It is a test of teamwork. Sasuke then piped up. Then why does Naruto pass when she fought you head-on as well? Kakashi held his forehead. because she identified the test and explained her reasoning for not complying with the standard rules. At least she wanted to. You two just went right for the most glaring option of all. Kakashi then lets out a slow sigh. Just, remember, always look underneath what is underneath. Sasuke and Kento huffed and turned their heads. Kakashi just shook his head, but I am passing you because I believe you can all grow to understand. He gave a pointed look at Naruto to keep her quiet. I assume he just deems me more responsible. Wonder if I won him over already. And like that her blade decided to speak up, no boys for you. Naruto pouted internally, I am just playing Yuki-chan. She heard a light huff, better be. Naruto stifled a giggle as she heard her sensei's dismissal with a meeting time in 2 weeks and took that as her cue to shunpo away. Naruto breathed heavily. She could feel her eyelids drooping as she forced her body to continue her training. She wanted to grow stronger. She would grow stronger. There are so many things for her to accomplish and strength was needed. So Naruto swung her blade, carefully weaving it in crescent arcs of silver. Naruto had noted, over the 2.5 months since she had been with her team every night she had trained herself to the very bone. And she had noticed the results. Her blade felt much lighter in her hand, as if the very blade itself was becoming closer to her soul. Along with that, she had noticed, at the very base of the blade where the blade met the hilt, there was clear ice, so perfect and clear, and much sharper than even the blade itself. Much stronger as well. She had figured as she mastered the use of the blade in its shikai she would see the whole blade turn into the tougher, sharper crystalline ice. She smiled. She was smiling at each and every swing of her blade brought her to mastery. And with all of the careful and meticulous work her skills were honed very carefully and with as little fault as possible. Her swordsmanship especially. With every bit of blood and sweat, she forced her body to adapt unconscious actions, lining up every muscle in her body to make the perfect arc in each swing and flow into the next. The very essence of cold was in her very body. She could feel it, controlling the very water molecules in the air, bringing the very water in the air closer and freezing it solid. Spikes, thin walls, thicker walls, the dances being extreme uses of the ability. And to devastating effect. Her range with the first dance was growing slowly. Angles hurt her concentration but slowly she was expanding that range. Naruto finally felt her body give out from under her. The last white ripple she had used had just toppled over nearly 80 meters of trees and froze them all solid and another 100 meters behind that was frosted and nearing 0 Celsius. Nearing. At the grin of satisfaction of her ability graced her lips as she finally dropped to the ground like every night before and slipped into unconsciousness. Naruto groaned. She sat herself up and glanced around her area, noticing the decimation of plant life in front of her. She let out a giggle and hugged her blade. We are doing great, Yuki-chan. You are doing great, but don't get too cocky, you still have much to learn. Naruto smiled and nodded as she picked herself to her feet. She quickly started using her shunpo to return to the Namikaze estate. She wanted to take a shower and change real quick before she had to meet her team for their first C-rank mission. She was excited to leave the village for once and besides the old drunk they were escorting, she was sure it was going to be relatively easy. Naruto had just finished drying her hair extensively. As she threw on her normal clothes, the difference being that instead of her normal waistcoat and black shirt she had a long-sleeved black shirt and a long flowing hooded white cloak, which one still could cover her entire body from head to toe. In most ninjas' cases you would not want such a cumbersome thing that limited the ability to grab the many weapons they hold. But for Naruto it was different. She only had her blade. It was the only thing she cared for and the only weapon she needed. With that she slipped the blade into the white sash she had around her waist and flew out the window, using shunpo to cross large roof spaces in an instant. Her speed had definitely improved. She spotted her teammates and dropped down beside them. They both turned to her at the same time and nodded. She always appeared a minute and a half before their sensei. No one knew how or why, but it was exactly that amount of time. And Sasuke leaned against the village gate while Kento focused on chatting with the bridge builder, their client, and Naruto simply stared at the road ahead, imagining all the things she could accomplish outside this village. She had never truly thought about it much, but there was a whole world outside of the village and so much to attain out there. She could do anything she liked, and grow without the limitations of a breeding-hungry village. Hell, she could start her own village if she pleased. If only she could just escape from this village. She sighed as she felt the energy from their sensei coming towards them. She has a hypothesis on why she can sense people's spiritual energy. Because of how chakra is unlocked and processed in the body, she figured that she was simply feeling the spiritual half of their chakra. And that is why it is usually practiced for her to double any presence around her in terms of strength. That is why she knew how strong Kakashi is. If he has grown rather complacent in peace. As Kakashi landed, he nodded to his students. He had been trying to up their taijutsu as much as physically possible for them, and it has worked in some. Naruto had been showing some growth despite her primary use of her prowess is her blade. Sasuke has soared in that department, while Kento has shown more skill in ninjutsu than Tai, though he was exceptional in both. Playing off of Naruto's strengths, he focused on her kenjutsu training heavily. But even so, he found that she actually was more skilled in the arts of the blade than himself. He had been surprised at first but respectfully took that L. Even so, with that information, he simply continued to spar with her, allowing her to use him as a target dummy for testing techniques which he would then Kawari me out of. Alright team, Naruto at point. Sasuke left flank, Kento right flank, I bring up the rear. Tazuna, please stand directly in the middle at all times to ensure your safety. Tazuna let out a low grumble and everyone fell into line with what will be a long trip. Naruto continued to scan the area, focusing on her sensing in order to ensure no intruders were anywhere near her client. She silently rubbed her eyes before her eyes widened. She slowly lowered her hand to gently rest on the hilt of her blade, and she used her other hand to sweep back her cloak, signaling to Kakashi there was a threat. As they kept walking, their pursuers made their move. Dashing as one, they wrapped Kakashi and shredded him with the chain that kept both of them together. Get the bridge builder, one shouted in a hurried tone. Naruto glanced at both Sasuke and her brother, noticing her brother in his childlike mind was frozen in fear, and Sasuke had already started moving, throwing many shurikens, pinning their chain to a tree. They quickly disconnected the chain and charged. Sasuke kicked one in the face, and before the other could counterattack, his head fell to the ground. Naruto breathed out a very light mist as her blade clicked back into its sheath. They were slow, very slow. Kakashi has used a Kawarimi set and ready for over 20 seconds before they moved. And using her shunpo, she doubted he even saw her move before his head touched the floor. The blood pooling as his body turned colder. Naruto glanced at the other one, who was already tied to a tree. Easily dispatched without the other to back him up. Naruto then turned and stared at the tree. She felt Kakashi's energy in and liked that he dropped down with an eye smile. You three did great. Naruto, you were wonderful. Easily dispatching your foe with utmost efficiency. Sasuke, you did great at shutting him down and restraining. I like that knot. And Kento, you stayed with the bridge builder and guarded him well. Good job. He then turned to the bridge builder. Now, Tazuna, would you like to explain why those men were after your head? Tazuna showed an immediate reaction with sweat starting to pour from his body. I have no clue. He stuttered out a half-hearted answer before Kakashi started focusing a slight amount of killing intent, and he cracked. Okay, I am building a bridge that will connect Wave Country to the outside world. This will allow us free trade and free us from a tyrannical ruler by the name of Gatu. He has imposed a forced tax which has taken every ryo from our savings for years and has forced everyone into a stasis. We are dying in Wave, and the cancer that is killing us is Gatu. Please, I am begging you to help us. There is no way we could afford anything above C rank. Quote. Kakashi let out a sigh as he rubbed his face, and just as he was about to deny the request, Naruto spoke up. I want to continue the mission. We showed we can take care of our own, and you are a renowned Jonin sensei. As much as I agree about the fact that he should have made a formal request to gain higher level mission values, we can do this. Sasuke and Kento seemed to agree as they stood behind her, nodding. Kakashi stood still for a moment as he digested everything. This is easily a B-class mission at this point, and while I believe my students can handle their own together, I still worry. And if I deny, it could negatively impact their future attempts at teamwork. They could start blaming each other in a worst-case scenario. Okay, I suppose we can continue. Kakashi cleared his throat and spoke to Tazuna clearly. Very well, we will continue to protect you until you complete the bridge, and afterward Konoha will want compensation for the endangerment of Genin. But I suppose that conversation will be with you and the Hokage after all of this. Tazuna bowed his head graciously. Thank you so very much. You have no idea how much this all means to Wave. Kakashi waved his hand and they all fell back into line, everyone much more serious about the mission. Their futures could ride on the completion of this mission. Naruto carefully focused on her senses. The mist was clouding her vision, and as much as she liked the cool climate of Wave, she was making very much sure to stay on the alert. This mist did not feel right. She let a cool breeze pass over her before she let out a loud shout, "Everyone down!" And like that, Kakashi tackled Tazuna to the ground and the rest dropped just in time as an absolutely massive blade slammed into a tree they had all just passed. As they all raised from the ground, they looked upon the shirtless form of a tall man, eyeing them all with an impassive look, only to stop on Naruto for a short moment, looking down at her blade and then nodding before his eyes glanced back to Kakashi. "So, Kakashi no Sharingan, huh? I read up about you from back in my swordsman days. Impressive. However, I am not really here for you. If you could hand over that bridge builder, we could all have a nice day." Sasuke's eyes widened dramatically. "Sharingan? But how? He definitely is not an Uchiha. Did he steal it?" Kakashi had a light voice, but his features were hardened and he already had a grip on a kunai. "Sorry Zabuza, but unfortunately I kinda need his head on his body for a good while." Zabuza shook his head. "Well, that is quite the shame. I was hoping to avoid bagging up your head for the bounty if possible, but if you are going to be that way I will just have to take him from you." Naruto stared up at Zabuza in admiration. She was one person she had studied extensively on her research on the swordsmen of her world. She was surprised how skilled and agile he is with that ridiculous blade of his. He was a pretty good inspiration for a few of her more acrobatic attacks. Kakashi turned to them with a hand on his headband. "Do not leave the bridge builder alone. Zabuza is a master of silent killing and could end all three of you before you even realized it." Kakashi quickly raised the kunai in front of himself to block the impossibly large blade from removing his head from his shoulders. "Don't you know, Kakashi, never take your eyes off of your opponent." Kakashi pulled his headband up, quickly revealing the spinning pinwheel eye under the plate. Zabuza grinned as he pushed harder into Kakashi's guard. "The Sharingan so soon? I'm honored." Kakashi jumped backward, parrying a blade that came flying at him at high speed before flipping forward over Zabuza and pulling a kunai tight against his neck. "Surrender." And like that, a blade was at his neck. "Die," was all Zabuza spoke before another kunai was at his neck. The Zabuza grinned before dissolving into the water, only to reveal the real Zabuza at the shore of the lake. "I see, you copied my water clone in the blink of an eye. Impressive, truly. But what good is that eye if there is nothing to see?" Zabuza made a half-ram seal, and like that the whole arena was flooded with mist so thick you could barely see your own hand in front of your face. Naruto drew her sword and closed her eyes, sharpening her senses. She could hear Kento breathing heavily. He kept shifting his feet and was rather erratic with his breathing. She assumed he was full panic mode. Then she heard Kakashi through the mist. "Don't worry, I will protect you all with my life." Kento seemed to calm and tense again, but this time a much more stern tense. Then she heard Zabuza's voice. But this time it was much closer. Centimeters away, she turned on heel and blocked his hefty blade. She strained but held herself. She kicked out his leg, sending him kneeling before spinning and lobbing his head off, only for him to fizzle into the water. She groaned as she heard the clanging of metal deeper into the mist. Slowly Zabuza began naming the 8 vital points. Each, even if only nicked, is fatal. She only wondered how he managed to strike any of them accurately enough with his berserker blade. Slowly she breathed in and breathed back out, calming every nerve in her body. She let herself relax into her stance and simply waited. Slowly, through the sounds of intense waves and the clashing of steel, she noticed. She could see the battle again. As could everyone else. The mist had cleared some and she found that Kakashi had been forced into a bubble of water and was waving at us rapidly to run. "Run. This battle was lost the moment I was captured. Take the bridge builder and run." Naruto took a deep breath and calmed her now rampant nerves. Zabuza just laughed, as if a bunch of green genin could outrun even a legless me. And like that, 10 water clones formed from the lake and started walking towards them confidently. "Each one of these clones is exactly 1/10 of my strength in every sense of the word. Once you can defeat one, I may consider any of you as a true ninja." Naruto let out an almost interchangeable growl and shifted her stance. This one made for wide sweeping attacks with intense speed. And like that, Naruto was gone. And before Zabuza could blink, was on the other side of the clones, sword outstretched. And in that moment of silence, all of the clones exploded into water. She stared at Zabuza impassively as she swung her blade, clearing it of water completely. And now I destroyed them all. Does that ruin your game, Zabuza-san? Zabuza furrowed his eyebrows at her. He had never thought a green genin like her would be able to slaughter his clones like that. It was extremely odd. Hey, maybe Haku has a little rival here. Alright, how do you plan on making me release your sensei here then? So you can handle 1/10 10 times at once. What about when all of it is combined? Naruto then shunpod close, forcing Zabuza to heft his blade in defense. Naruto flashed behind him and slashed again. He brought his blade behind his back to block, and like before, she kept flashing around him, slashing over and over at increasing speed. Zabuza would never in his life admit it, but he was being overwhelmed. He could barely keep his sword at pace with only one arm, and she was still making nicks along his arms and a couple on his chest. Then he finally noticed it. She was stuck in an endless pattern of attack. He grinned viciously when she flashed exactly where he expected. He brought down his blade to her head and his eyes widened. Thank you. She had dropped low, using her spiritual energy to stay on the water, and kicked up, hard, sending him flying into the air. Taking advantage, she jumped upwards, only to be surprised when he still managed to block with his massive sword. But her goal was accomplished. She dropped back down and flashed backward towards shore. Zabuza went to pursue, only to be forced to block a kunai. He cursed silently at the fact that he was forced to release the prison. He parried a few strikes from Kakashi and then backed off, stowing his blade as he formed hand seals. He immediately noticed Kakashi making the same seals and cursed again. Hoping he held superiority with his primary water affinity and years of hard work, he continued and then released his water dragon, only to be surprised when Kakashi had emerged another dragon of equal size. They clashed and like that cancelled each other out in chaotic waves of water. Just as quickly, Zabuza started forming seals, and just like before, he noticed Kakashi doing the same seals. But this time he actually did announce his curse when he noticed Kakashi doing them faster. Screaming, Zabuza tried to speed up, but it was too late. Kakashi released the jutsu, announcing its name casually. Water style. Exploding water wave. The jutsu sent Zabuza spiraling into trees, slamming his skull viciously into a tree in the process before finally stopping when he slammed into another tree back first. And like that, two kunai thunked into his shoulders, immobilizing him. Can that I see the future? Zabuza asked weakly. Kakashi stared down at him from the branch above. Why yes, your future is death, Zabuza. Before Kakashi could strike the finishing blow, two needles slammed into Zabuza's neck. He immediately dropped limp. Naruto stared at the now dead man who served as a role model for her for a few years. It was kind of a downer, but she focused her attention on the masked figure who was now speaking to. She heard her voice. It was so soft, beautiful really. But it was empty. So hollow, like everything was stripped from her and she was forced to live a certain way. That really sealed Naruto's mood. Now set in a saddened state, she simply walked over to Kakashi, who by now had completely dropped to the ground from exhaustion. She sighed and picked him from the ground. She looked at Tazuna and her now stunned teammates and looked apathetically into Tazuna's eyes. Tazuna, if you would, our sensei is injured and he needs rest. Tazuna nearly jumped as he started speaking, beckoning them to follow. You all can stay with me while you are all here. It is only a few minutes down the road, we will be there super quick. Naruto and her team came to the door to the spare bedroom and lied Kakashi down on the only futon out at the moment, slowly stripping off his clothes and bandaging his minor wounds. To his credit, he only got a few nicks and scrapes over the entire fight. She sighed. It took about an hour and a half to fix up their sensei, and honestly, if it were any more grievous of wounds, she would probably have failed miserably. She was not too good at the medical procedure, but she knew enough about simple wounds. She looked him over once again and nodded. At that, she simply made her way to the futon she had rolled out herself and lied down, getting really nice and comfy before literally passing out. Naruto came down the stairs groggily. Her hair was a mess and her sleeping clothes, well, not so innocent. With just a big t-shirt and some panties protecting her modesty, she sat down and started eating the well-prepared breakfast. Kento chooses that time to pipe up. I don't know if you think you are such a badass after the lucky stunt you pulled, but make sure you remember that you are still pathetic under me. Naruto rolled her eyes and continued to eat. Sasuke really didn't bother with anything as he continued to eat. They all turned when they heard the hobbling footsteps of their sensei. Kakashi rubbed the back of his neck as he looked over his students. Slowly he made his way over to the table. As he sat down he thanked Tazuna's daughter, Tsunami, who had been the one to make the food. So I am going, to be honest with you all. Zabuza is most likely alive. The hunter ninja that appeared used very precise weapons called senbon. They are used to activate certain pressure points all over the body. And the ones that she struck were ones that can put a body into near-perfect stasis. Naruto rubbed her eyes annoyedly. She did not want to deal with him again. Kakashi waved his hand lightly. Worry not, little genin, it should be at least 2 weeks until he appears again. Meaning it is time for us to kick our training into high gear. As best I can at least. I will do all I can to increase your survivability. And maybe even put you in combat readiness. Kento and Sasuke looked at him expectantly as he slowly picked up his chopsticks and very slowly started on his breakfast. Hope you three are ready. 'Cause it will not be easy. He took another bite as he thought things over. First is speed training. I have some simple gravity seals on me to help with that. He moved a few pieces of food to the side before taking another piece in his mouth. Then I suppose I will do what I can to train you in some kenjutsu. It will be using kunai and short-ranged attacks, but all in all, it should help. He let out a yawn as he stretched casually. Then I suppose chakra control will be useful for the boys. And Naruto. We will keep with our normal regime, and after that, I will allow you to do your own thing. You seem to excel like that. Naruto let a barely noticeable smile grace her lips and nodded towards her sensei graciously. Kakashi finished his food and gently stacked his plate and chopsticks with the others on the tables and thanked Tsunami. Alright. Each day I will go with Tazuna to the bridge in the mornings tonight. I will be working constantly with him. So I will get you all started today since this is an open day for everyone. And each evening I will leave you with basic and more advanced instructions to accomplish while I am gone. So I expect you all to do everything you can do to accomplish both. But don't overwork yourselves. We need everyone to be ready at all times. Each of them agreed on that topic and nodded towards their sensei. Kakashi eyes smiled. Well, good. We can get started right now. And like that he started to hobble towards the door. Naruto had been training heavily. She was held up against a tree. Her shikai long ago fading back into its sealed form. Naruto could barely handle herself at that point. She had trained herself to the bone with non-stop training. Over her usage of the spiritual power, it had grown dramatically over the years, and she had used every last drop over the course of 3 days of non-stop usage. After everything she did, there was quite the amount of frozen plant life. She stumbled out of her blast zone and a few more meters before finally dropping to the ground and passing out. Breathing out slowly, enjoying the chilling atmosphere of the woods this early in the morning, walking through the forest looking for specific species of herbs to mix into medicine for deep wounds. Spotting the purple color of the herb she was looking for, she smiled slightly. Slowly she moved towards the plants before stopping dead in her tracks at the edge of the clearing. She eyes the young sword's mistress that managed to push Zabuza to release the water prison in under 10 seconds at that. Slowly she reached into the basket she was holding, gripping a hidden senbon. She moved forward with such a light step even some of the most skilled shinobi would be oblivious. As she stalked up, she got a better look at Naruto's face. She seemed at peace, cute lips parted slightly as she slept. A sleek angular face with nearly sparkling pale skin. She was in a mess of her cloak as she slept but was completely unfazed by the temperature, which was still slightly below freezing. Her hair was frayed out dramatically like she had dropped unceremoniously. Haku shook her head for just a moment as she tightened her grip on her senbon before finally releasing it. I am too weak sometimes. This girl is the enemy, but I am just going to let her leave with her life. I am sorry, Zabuza-sama. Haku gently crouched down and sat on her knees, shaking Naruto gently. Come on now, you will catch a cold if you sleep out here like this. Naruto stirred from her position, scratching her head for a moment with groggy eyes. She glanced up at the sky, realizing it was barely 6 in the morning, and groaned. I'm gonna melt Tilda, she dramatically hummed out before dropping back to the ground. Haku giggled with a hand over her mouth. Well, we can't have that either. Naruto sat up slowly and leaned against a tree as she eyes Haku. Hello, sorry but I am not sure I know you. Haku noted the tone change, and the features shift to a more proper format. Haku smiled and started collecting the herbs. Oh, I am simply picking some medicinal herbs for someone precious to me. Naruto turned her head curiously. Someone precious to you? Haku glanced at her. Do you not have someone that is very precious to you? Naruto looked down at the ground and slowly processed it. No, I have not thought about that in a long time. This blade I carry though. She has been with me for a very long time. In my way, she is the only thing I care for anymore. Haku's eyes softened as she finished picking her herbs and she turned to Naruto. So you have no one? Were your parents killed? Naruto shook her head slightly. Not really. They do not care for me. I am insignificant in their eyes. Too weak to be one of them. So they ignore me completely. Haku nodded, she understood that. She took it all in and then spoke. If I know one thing it is to that when you find at least one person to take you it is difficult to be alone again. I do not like being alone and it is very difficult to think of a life without that one precious person by my side. And I believe that the blade you wield is something that has grown with you. Almost like an extension of your very soul. Keep that in mind. Naruto smiled at her. You know, I do not think that I have ever met someone with a better viewpoint on life than that. Unfortunately, I lack those bonds. They are missing from my life and cast off. That need was killed when I was forced to end them. I only truly hope that one day everything will work out and I can rekindle those needs. To feel properly again. Haku lowered her head for a moment before nodding to herself. Do you think that is possible? To rekindle that need? Naruto sat still for a moment thinking over the question silently before speaking. I am not quite sure. I really just want to hope it is possible. It is all I truly hope for in my life. Even death is something I have grown to embrace and expect. I would die with a smile on my face if I had just one more person to latch onto and know they are there through everything. So to answer, I just hope it is possible. Haku let out a soft breath then smiled. Perhaps one day you can truly find that person. I wish you every bit of luck in your search. Naruto stood up and gazed at Haku, a smile on her face. You know, whoever your precious person is, I kinda envy them. You are a wonderful person. May I know your name? Haku just smiled. Haku, and yours? Naruto smiled happily. It is Naruto. Do you think we could meet again sometime? I am going to be around for a week or so. Maybe we can relax by the ocean for a while and enjoy the view. Haku seemed to think hard for a moment. If I say yes, I could be making bonds with the enemy. If I have to kill them after I make bonds I may not be able to do it. But, I really want to. I want to talk to her, she reminds me of myself. I am so sorry Zabuza-sama. Haku also stood and smiled happily. Let's do it, in 2 days, let's meet right here. Right before sunset, okay? Naruto nodded as she glanced at her surroundings for a moment before nodding again. Alright, she smiled brightly. See you then. And with that, she blurred away. Haku frowned for a moment before turning and smiling. Yes, I will see you then. I promise. And with that Haku jumped to the trees and started moving back towards the base. Naruto sat at the base of the tree and waited. It was about 2 hours from sunset and she knew she was early. She wanted to be a bit early so she could get as much time in as possible. Haku was such a refreshing person to be around. She had a wonderful outlook on life and people that it was nice to talk to her. Unlike everyone around her all dim and dreary. Though she did suppose she contributed to it. Naruto sat in wait idly, running her hand over the hilt of her blade gently. She smiled silently as she did so, knowing Yuki-chan loved it when she did. They can feel each other when she is in contact with the blade. Just before she was about to enter her mind to speak with her, Naruto's ear twitched. Her senses flared up for a moment before she recognized the energy that was Haku's. It was weird. She almost felt like herself. Chilling, but comforting. Naruto stood up and waited. It only took another minute for Haku to enter the clearing with a smile. Haku waved as she moved closer. It is a nice evening to do this. Shall we head out to catch the sunset? Naruto didn't say anything, just grinned and waved for her to follow before locking her arms together behind her back as she started to skip off to the best view she had ever seen. Haku smiled at her enthusiasm and followed at an even pace. She figured she made a good impression if Naruto is opening up so much. Then she slowly clicked the dots together. I could be the only person to listen and help her in years. She could be trying to grasp at something. Anything. Haku frowned slightly at that but didn't falter. Perhaps this would be good for both of them. Naruto slowly leads her into the brush, pushing away the bits of plant life blocking their path. She really wanted at least one person to sow this place too. She had found it one day when scouting the area. Haku was nice to be around, but Naruto knew something was off about her. She was a very gentle person, she noticed. She carried herself that way. Added to the fact that she cared enough to meticulously pick herbs for her precious person, and the fact that Zabuza escaped with a fake hunter Nin, and the fact Haku had very impressive pressure. Perhaps even a little stronger than Zabuza himself. At this point, Naruto refused to allow herself to care. If there was any other person in her life to help her, perhaps she would have chosen a different route. Maybe she would have slit Haku's throat the moment she felt such pressure from her. But no, Naruto allowed herself this weakness. She allowed herself to become oblivious. She allowed everything and she couldn't care. Smiling as they made it to the spot she wanted to share. She held back a bit of brush like a door for Haku to pass. Haku smiled gently as she walked past, pulling her eyes to look out at what will forever be ingrained in her mind. Before her laid a beautiful scape of the ocean from a grassy cliffside. The sunset teetering on the edge of the horizon, making the ocean glint in a wondrous mix of yellow and orange. Haku's eyes practically glittering at the sight as she exhaled slowly. It's beautiful. Naruto sauntered up beside her with a smile spread happily across her face. It is truly wondrous. I have never seen such a truly beautiful scene in my life. It struck me the moment I saw it, and I could not just keep this to myself. I had to show someone. So, I want this to be our spot. Just between the two of us. Haku turned her head and stared into Naruto's eyes with a smile. Just between us? Naruto nodded enthusiastically. Then Haku nodded. Okay, just between us. Naruto smiled and did a little twirl before plopping down onto the ground, her arms placed for support behind her back as she crossed her legs. She looked up to Haku and patted the spot next to her. Sit with me for a bit. It is really a nice night to relax. Haku stared down at Naruto's beautiful violet eyes, sparkling in the light of the sunset. Temporarily stunning Haku. It took a moment for Haku to catch herself, but she quickly smiled and sat down next to Naruto, crossing her legs and staring out at the sunset. They both smiled, silently enjoying each other's company. Uncaring for the outside world, for just a couple hours they ignored all of their other responsibilities and just sat, talking to each other about the dumbest of subjects and just purely enjoying each other's company. Naruto had been eating dinner. She had not planned to meet Haku today, but she wished she did, with her brother constantly glaring her down. She simply blew off his glares with blatant indifference. Kento growled as he stood up, shaking the table with his swift shift as he pointed at her. What the fuck is wrong you? Why are you such a bitch all that time? You never even speak a word to me or Sasuke, really, for that matter, and all you do is silently sit as if none of us even exist. Kakashi started to stand upon that, raising his hands. Now let's calm down now. Naruto gently set her chopsticks down and stood up, carefully, gracefully, and stared him in the eye. Because you are a part of the family that treats me as if I do not exist. I am simply civil. I work with you and Sasuke as needed and fulfill my duties as required. Nothing more, nothing less. Kakashi held a hand up to Naruto. Let's not do this here. Kento glared at her. Of course, you are weak. Tiny, insignificant, you can't even unlock your chakra. How do you think you will ever get anywhere as a shinobi? You might as well have stayed home and waited to be married off in some political wedding. At least then you would have been useful in some way. Kento. Kakashi glared at the boy who had crossed his arms and continued to glare at Naruto. Naruto paused, her impassive barrier crumbling around her as she took a step back. Was she really that useless? Was she so useless that all she was good for was marriage? Furthering political gains and being a mindless doll. Was she that useless? Everything Naruto had done up until now and all of her accomplishments flew out to the wind when he struck the one chord that could crack all of her defenses. Before she could let her brother see the tears in her eyes, she turned on heel, her cloak blowing with the door being swung open quickly before it slammed just as fast. Naruto curled up in her warm cloak on the cliff face that she had brought Haku to. It held nice memories. She wanted to be somewhere nice to let out all of her tears. Her tears poured down into the grassy ground as she thought of all of the things he had said. Was she useless? Could she even help anyone? Could she protect anyone like she is now? Why couldn't anyone love her? Was there anyone who would accept her? It was at a point where Naruto had no clue what she could or couldn't do. She never experienced love. She never knew what it could solve or how to live with it. She had always lived with indifference. She could never understand her own thinking with no experience. The only one to truly love her was Yuki-chan. And she was a part of her own soul. Was there no other kindred souls out there though? Someone to stand with her? Anyone? Naruto? Naruto's whimpers caught in her throat as she heard one of the only people to ever speak to her personally. Haku? She quietly wiped her eyes and sniffled slightly as she sat up. Haku slowly moved forward. Naruto? What's wrong? Who did this? Naruto sniffled again as more tears started to force themselves out of her eyes. Haku slowly knelt down and wrapped her arms around Naruto. It's okay, I am here for you. Haku gently held her close and ran her fingers through her hair as Naruto gripped her kimono, crying into her chest as she pulled herself tightly into the embrace. Haku continued to run her fingers through her hair as she waited for Naruto to calm down. After 20 minutes Naruto had started to calm down. Her bawling slowly progressed into silent sobs. It took her a few moments to collect herself before speaking, though she held the embrace tightly through everything. My brother. He started screaming, telling me I was weak. I was worthless. That I should have stayed home and been married off. That. Haku gently lifted her chin up to meet her eyes. Naruto, do not listen to any of that. It is all lies. You are strong, you have strength like no one else, being able to withstand every bit of mental degradation focused on you by your parents. Never believe what he says because you are different. You are strong, powerful, and beautiful. Haku stared down into Naruto's glittering eyes as she gripped her kimono tighter. Really? She gripped slightly tighter. You're not lying? Haku smiled and gently ran her fingers deeply through her hair. Of course, I would never lie to you. Naruto stared into the silver eyes that almost let Naruto stare into her very soul and saw nothing but compassion and care. Naruto faltered for a moment and then slowly wrapped her arms around her, gently nuzzling into her neck. Don't leave me. I just need someone to stay with me. Haku gently pulled her closer and closed her eyes slowly. I won't, I promise. Just relax. Naruto hummed in approval as she slowly drifted into a deep slumber. Truly drained from all of her cryings, Haku had long settled into the embrace after realizing that whatever was in Naruto's arms when she fell asleep was stuck there until she woke back up. It only took her a few more minutes to finally fall into a deep sleep. Naruto groggily opened her eyes, yawning cutely as she rubbed her left eye with her hand as she pushes herself up gently. It took her a moment to notice that whatever was under her palm was squishy. She took a moment to think before she opened her eyes to what was under her. Naruto started to slowly grow a blush on her face. Haku was under her, still silently breathing as Naruto slowly removed her hand from her breast. She looked at her surroundings for a few moments, realizing that she was back on the cliffside. Slowly the memories of last night came back and Naruto frowned. She had admitted a lot. But, Naruto felt something for this girl. She was still straddling Haku, but she just couldn't move. She felt so comfortable with her. She gently lied back down and nuzzled into her chest. She wanted to think that there were things were okay in the village, that she had people there that cared for her, but the more she thought the more she realized how little she had in the village. She had barely spoken 12 sentences to anyone in the village. And while she did enjoy Iruka, he was very rare to see. She never really spoke to anyone else and no one ever really talked to her. Naruto sighed slowly as she nuzzled closer. She couldn't decide. She was at an impasse. Would she choose bloodlines? Or would she choose the one who truly cares at the sacrifice of everything? Even at the cost of her life. Would she be willing to throw everything she has ever known just to chase what could be? As she was thinking, Haku slowly started to wake up, groggily rubbing one of her eyes as she glanced down to the form of Naruto's sprawled out hair, gently nuzzling into her chest. Haku blushed slightly. Why you comfy down there? Naruto let out a soft giggle. Maybe I am tilde, can't I stay tilde? Naruto intentionally made a cute face as she glanced up into Haku's eyes. Haku just could not bring herself to deny her face and just started to run her fingers through her hair and simply nodded. Of course you can. Naruto giggled happily and curled up gently. Thanks. You made me feel a lot better last night. It was nice. Haku nodded with a smile. Of course. I will be here anytime you need. Naruto closed her eyes, a gentle smile on her face. Thank you. For everything. Naruto breathed out slowly. Gazing up her blade she smiled. The blade was almost halfway crystallized. If her hypothesis was correct, that would mean she is on her way to mastery of her Zanpakuto. She let out a quiet giggle and hugged the blade tightly. As she sat back against a tree she closed her eyes and focused on her own mind. Entering her mindscape, I would never have gotten this far without you, Yuki-chan. Thank you. Shirayuki lets a smile grace her lips unseen by her master. Why of course Lady Naruto, you are my master, I must help you no matter what. Naruto stared up at Shirayuki, blinked once before shaking her head. No, you are family. At that Yuki blanched, letting her face drop into confusion. We share no bloodlines. We cannot possibly be family. Naruto shook her head. Family is family and blood is blood. A family may be in blood, but true family is those you have the closest bond of all with. You are family, Yuki-chan. Because we are two parts of the same soul. Two different halves, and when released we work as one, we are truly family. Because in all honesty, we are twins. I am you. Yuki's eyes widened before she spoke for Naruto. And, I am you. Naruto smiled happily. Exactly. Twins tilde. Yuki smiled as she gently pulled Naruto into a hug. Just then Naruto sighed and left Yuki's arms. Sorry, Yuki-chan. Company. Yuki simply nodded with a smile on her face as Naruto transitioned out of her mindscape. Naruto let out a yawn and glanced around before noticing Kakashi standing behind her. He looked very serious. Who is this Yuki? Naruto's eyes widened for a moment before she schooled her features. I'm sorry, Kakashi-sensei? Kakashi glared lightly. You spoke the name Yuki with the suffix chan. This implies close bonds. So, who is Yuki and why did you apologize to her? Naruto growled internally. I started to transition out while I was speaking and ended up giving my waking body a command to speak. She slowly willed her features to be saddened as she thought of an excuse and waved Kakashi off. Yuki is a very good friend of mine who has passed. It comforts me slightly to talk to her every now and again. Ya no. Saying my goodbyes and such, saying that I may see her soon. Naruto's lie seemed to bite as Kakashi's eye drooped slightly and lowered his head. I understand. Sorry for the hard questions. I just came to tell you we are expecting some company either tomorrow or the next. Naruto nodded silently, thanks. I will take it easy in order to stay on top of it all. Quote. Kakashi's eyes smiled. Thanks, I will leave you to it. Naruto slowly waited for his presence to cease from her focus before a smile bled back onto her face. Looks like we get to relax, Yuki-chan. Naruto heard a slight giggle before, yes, you are doing great, Lady Naruto. We can afford a break. Naruto happily sauntered back towards the house. Naruto stared up at the ceiling, breathing in and out as she thought everything through. After everything, it was becoming increasingly difficult to decide. On one hand, she has the chance to truly live. Haku lit a fire in her, really making her feel alive. While on the other hand, she thought back to the village. There she was safe, nearly guaranteed a sustainable life without much trouble besides the work she would have to attend to with her missions. But in the village, she would forever be locked down with the chains that are her family. Unable to move from her stagnated position and live a dull, uneventful life. What ties did she have? Which ties could she sustain? Would she be willing to lose everything for something? Naruto let out a deep breath before closing her eyes. She had decided. Grunting in pain as another senbon impacted his body, Kento groaned and parried another wave of the irritating weapons. This dome of ice was thick. Incredibly thick. Kento had been idly channeling some of the fox's chakra, hoping to counteract a lot of the bleeding and counteracting the pressure points being placed over his entire body. He had brief moments of terror when one or two of his limbs stalled for a moment before the fox took care of it. He had Sasuke watching his back though. He honestly felt rather close with Sasuke, growing up all his life with him by his side. They were always close, so when they had been made a team, Kento was rather happy that he made it with someone he liked and could trust. His sister always acted bitchy, ignoring him constantly as well as Sasuke, which only fueled his rage. He wondered though. The hunter nin that was peppering them with the debilitating weapons seemed angered specifically at himself, as he had been on the receiving end of quite the many more than Sasuke. It is like she was angry at him for some reason, though in the end it really didn't matter as he was dodging for his very life at the moment. Sasuke rolled backward as Kento moved in to block a volley of senbon aimed at his brother in all but blood. Sasuke coughed slightly as he steadied his breath. "Kento, you have those clones, right?" Kento glanced towards Sasuke and nodded before staring back into the mirrors. Sasuke got back to his feet and grinned. "Start sending rounds of them towards the mirrors. I think I have a way to end this." Kento nodded. He still had plenty of chakra left, so he did as he was told. He crossed his fingers in an odd tiger seal and started sending waves of 10 in all directions. Just as he did, Sasuke splashed a puddle of water hard, making it explode into the air in water droplets. Just then Haku moved, destroying all of the clones nearly before they could blink before blowing the two back to the center. Sasuke grinned and wiped his lip as he spoke. "Kento, do that one more time." Kento nodded, releasing another wave with a grunt, this one larger. And again Sasuke slammed up a mass of water, and again Sasuke grinned as the clones were destroyed. But this time his grin formed a frown when Kento took a senbon to the neck. He quickly dropped to the ground, completely paralyzed. Sasuke growled. Though he would never outwardly admit it in his lifespan, he knew that Kento was like a brother to him. He couldn't lose him now. He could barely even imagine a world without him. And almost as if the world was taunting him, he watched as she flanked them, attacking Kento, who was now paralyzed if only temporarily. She wanted to take him out. Then Sasuke realized. He could see. Sasuke moved quick, anticipating the attack, and parried, knocking her back into a mirror. Haku let out a silent growl. She was confused about her own actions. Every spot she aimed for was vital. These kids were decent for their age and managed to always make her miss. She did not want to take a proactive role in their demise by entering close combat, but she did want Naruto's brother to feel even a large amount of pain. She couldn't understand. She hated the thought of what she could be becoming, but she had no time. She had to hurry. The battle was dragging far too long. She glanced at Sasuke before figuring out her plan of action. Then she started bouncing around her dome, releasing 1 or 2 senbon at a time. She found he had the Sharingan like a lot of his clansmen. He could predict where to block but could barely keep up. She added a bit to her speed and watched as he took the bait. Then she released a hail of senbon directly opposite of the last senbon. Sasuke quickly noticed. He winced preemptively as he flipped over Kento's body and blocked the storm of steel with his back. Kento stared up into Sasuke's eyes as he coughed a little blood up. Sasuke let a slight chuckle into his voice. "Yeah, no. I really wish I could have done some more." Sasuke then dropped, falling to the ground painfully as the points pierced knocked him out quickly. Kento growled as he leaked more of Kyuubi's chakra. The power slowly started to rise from his system, building around him in a red flow of chakra. His eyes slit as he glared up into the mirrors. Haku stared him down with an impassive glare. "Ah, a simple berserker when one loses control. How saddening that you have no grasp of your own mind." Unfortunately, Haku had severely underestimated the very power of the strongest of the Biju. With a loud roar, Kento unlocked the first gate of chakra, that was the Kyuubi's tails. The red liquid-like tail bursting from his spine as he released a shockwave like a roar which cracked the mirrors instantly. Haku stumbled for a moment as she stared in shock at the shocking power. And before she could recover, Kento had already implanted a fist into her face, shattering the mirror she was in along with the dome from lack of chakra flow. Kento stared down at her flattened form with red eyes as he stalked forward like the animal he was. Her mask had long since fallen from her face, shattered along with her mirrors from the impact. Haku had a tear streaking down her face. "I am sorry, Zabuza. Naruto. I have failed you both." Just as Kento was reaching down for her shirt to pull her up and break her down again, he stopped. Just as a deep slash across his chest formed and sprayed blood. He coughed horribly and dropped to the ground, the cloak of volatile chakra receding. Haku glanced hopefully towards the cause of the horrid wound. Naruto's snow-like cloak billowed in the wind as she held her blade ready to her side. "Haku. I am here to be with you. You are the only person to ever have shown me true kindness in ages. So, I am here for you. Haku stalled for a moment, saddened that she had been, albeit indirectly, drawn another into the difficult lives of missing Nen. Just then she felt an intense flow of chakra emanating from where Zabuza was, meaning Zabuza-sama. Haku tried to form another ice mirror only to realize when her mirrors shattered her flow was broken, so she could not retrieve the excess she had pumped in. She had no more chakra to form any more mirrors. Then, without a word, Naruto blurred away. Kakashi held his left hand tightly as lightning covered his hand and forearm. You should be honored, Zabuza. Few see this move for even a moment before they're dead. Enjoy it. Kakashi then sped forward, aiming to pierce Zabuza's heart. Just then Kakashi came to a realization. Naruto was heading for him and fast. And that she would easily intercept him. Naruto had forced her to speed up a bit and slammed right into Kakashi and did manage to knock him off target, but they were moving too fast, and even though Naruto managed to keep his heart intact, Zabuza's chest and part of his neck were bleeding profusely. Zabuza stared Naruto in the eye for a moment. You are the one Haku has been hanging around, aren't you? Naruto got up, staring back into Zabuza's eyes. She nodded respectfully. Yes, I hear wonderful things about you. Zabuza chuckled lightly. You knew, all along. By now the dogs had been released from their summon and returned to their homes. While Zabuza fell to his knees. Take good care of her. Naruto nodded and bowed her head respectfully as he finally collapsed, just as Haku stumbled into the area to see his last breath. Haku dropped to her knees and started crying. Naruto immediately ran to her side, wrapping her arms around her. I am so sorry. I did all I could. I was too slow. I was not good enough. I am so sorry for losing your precious person. Haku gripped her arms and cried into Naruto's chest as she patiently held onto Haku, hoping to help at least somewhat. But it was all for naught as Kakashi stepped in. I am sorry to intervene, but Naruto, you are currently consoling the enemy, and why did you actively knock me off my mark? Naruto turned to him with a glare. She whispered an apology into Haku's ear as she stood and faced Kakashi. Kakashi, I hereby renounce my second name Namikaze, with you as the witness as well as Haku. As well as I renounce my Konoha citizenship and my shinobi duties less officially. Kakashi sighed as he stared at Naruto before lowering his head. Has everything truly been that bad for you? Have they really severed all of your ties? Naruto nodded. I have been thinking about it for a while and this is the way I wish to go. Kakashi nodded. Could I ask one thing? Have one last battle with me. I just want to see if you can handle it out here, and I want you to use that energy of yours. I want you at full strength. Naruto's eyes widened as she stared at him and he decided to explain preemptively, I can see chakra with my eye. But the only thing I see is a far more compressed energy in you, which is how you seem to step from place to place. I also see it constantly flowing through the blade of yours. Quote. Naruto grinned slightly and nodded. Very well. One last time. Kakashi smiled slightly before a frown formed again. Clapping hands through the fading mist echoed along with a voice. Oh great, they couldn't even end one. Well, glad I didn't invest much in you too. I got these guys for that now. And like that the mist cleared a bit more to view the 200-strong thugs and Ronin hired by the tycoon of a man. Naruto glanced at Kakashi with a smile. Perhaps I will give you a brief glimpse. She then looked at Haku. Haku. She called her name, to which she looked up in response, tears staining her eyes. I know you hate killing. But I wish to dedicate this dance to you and Zabuza. Naruto slowly strode forward as Gato fearfully ordered them to attack. Naruto held her blade up. A good performance for my precious person, Yuki-chan? Yuki simply smiled. Anything for you, Lady Naruto. Naruto pulled in a breath and slowly turned her blade. Dance, Soda no Shirayuki. The ribbon flowed extravagantly from the hilt, and the half-crystallized blade forming. An immensely cold wave washed over each one in the audience. First dance, White Moon. Naruto smiled gently and slowly twirled with her blade, making a circle. Like that, a white circle glowed on the ground directly in the center of the small army, 15 meters in diameter, which glowed like a full moon. Then in an instant, everything became below zero. A massive pillar of ice formed, reaching the very heavens, sparkled magnificently. Each one in that diameter was instantly frozen to death, with little thought to their lives. Naruto breathed out a cold steamy breath. Though, due to the opposite reason as the normal. Naruto slowly twirled her blade before holding it downwards. The 150 or so charging her. Naruto pierced the ground 4 times, the ice particles in the air freezing and floating upwards. Next dance, white ripple. She slowly pulled her blade back so it was level with her eyes, then thrust forward like a normal piercing strike. A rippling wave of freezing ice and wind forced itself forward, lasting 3 seconds, which was all it took for the freezing wind and ice to freeze a majority of their skin off. There was still only about 50 left, and some of the stronger-willed ones came to charge her. Naruto closed her eyes as she did a carefully practiced low spin before extending her blade. Third dance, white sword. Naruto's blade grew dramatically to over 80 meters in length. Still, as light as ever, she swung with her whole body, decapitating the rest of the army, including the men who were practically ice sculptures, as well as the pillar, which shattered with the ice of the blade shattering as momentum took it. Ice clattered to the ground and some even fell like gentle snowflakes, creating a dazzling array of sparkling ice which glistened even further in the bright moonlight. Then only the tycoon stood. And finally, just for you, Haku. Naruto stood straight, as she pierced her blade into the ground as a trail of ice traveled all the way to the shivering Gatta's legs. He tried to say a word but immediately let out a blood-curdling scream as he started to freeze. Roots grew as he raised off the ground with a small trunk-shaped structure as branches started to form until Gatta no longer stood in only a crumbling tree of ice. White tree. Naruto turned as her cloak fluttered. A smile held on her face, smiling down at Haku. Her arms held wide out in a presenting manner. Did you like it? Haku sat for a moment, her eyes wide at the beautiful display of both power and grace. It was beautiful. Naruto slowly sheathed her blade, closing her eyes as the tree started to crumble. Her body temperature slowly started to stabilize as well as the environment temperature. I'm glad. Naruto locked her hands behind her back as she beamed. Kakashi slowly made his way forward with his now 2 students still unconscious. They are alive, thankfully. Luckily, there is 1 student still in reserves due to the max number of students achieving rank. So we will fill your spot soon. And after your performance, I believe I can trust you in this world. I only want you to feel as free as you can. And live to your utmost out here in the world. Just be careful. Naruto bowed graciously. Thank you. How will you explain not being able to detain me? Kakashi sighed slowly. I suppose I could say you left with Zabuza's apprentice when you made a connection while I was in combat with Zabuza. No heat for me and you will have plenty of time to leave the area. Get your pack, map, and some food from the house. Be out in 2 hours. I do not want them to know anything. Also here. He handed over a copy of the bingo book from his pouch as well as an orange-colored book underneath, which was placed sneakily under the black book so Haku could not see. He giggled quietly and whispered, "Don't let her see the orange one." Naruto, while confused, decided to slip it secretively in her cloak pocket and moved on for the time being. She then nodded and looked at Haku, who at this point had recovered enough to function, stood and waved for her to follow, and they both started moving for the house. They would need all they could get. A flash of silver blurred through the air as Naruto cut down one of the hunter nin who was so vicious in all of his attacks. Naruto kept her eye on the battle between Haku and one of the other aggressors in the team of 3. She raised her blade in defense of a number of shuriken coming from the final member of the group. Her eyes glanced towards Haku and noticed she had kicked him into a tree. Taking the chance, she blurred away and removed his head. It was always this way. Haku despised the act of ending another life. And while that is okay for bandit camps and headhunters, at times these hunter nin will transmit their locations and ruin their evasion tactics. So Naruto more often than not tried to end their lives before Haku could act. Which sometimes could make some formations difficult. Such as this one. A fireball was racing towards both her and Haku. The third member was not sitting and waiting as she was preparing to deal with the 2 of them. Naruto moved quickly, pushing Haku out of the way before mumbling a few words hurriedly. It however was for naught, as the small blue fireball she managed to create only traveled 1.5 meters towards the fireball, which caused a large explosion of blue and orange flames, knocking her 10 meters back, cracking a tree with her impact. Haku acted quick, moving towards the aggressor with a fury in her eyes. throwing senbon rapidly towards numerous pressure points and joints attempting to immobilize her target. The hunter nin was quite skilled as it would seem, acrobatically flipping about and using the trees to aid her dodging skills. Haku, while extremely fast and agile, was only matching her speed. Flipping over a Tonto strike, she formed seals mid-air before landing and placed the palms of her hands directly on the ground. Ice spread from the ground and spread out in all directions, piercing through numerous trees. The hunter nin took one through the arm before deciding it was dead weight and shed the appendage with her blade. She took a moment to regain her balance before diving at the recovering Haku. Haku turned with wide eyes before the woman fell to the ground almost mid-flight. Naruto stood over the now headless woman, panting heavily. Haku, work on your recovery times. Too much time spent in between attacks are not very good in combat. Naruto cracked her back, then stretched her arms a bit before sheathing her blade. She raised her left hand, the same one she cast the spell with, and noticed some rather noticeable burns. She turned her head back towards Haku with a smile as she hid her hand under her cloak. Looks like we made it out rather well though. Just a few scratches and bruises. We should keep going, we do have a deadline to keep. Haku nodded slowly as she breathed deeply. Are you sure you are alright, Naruto? That was a pretty big blast. Naruto smiled and moved towards Haku, making sure she turned her body to hide her left hand completely when she wrapped her arms around Haku. Of course, it didn't really hurt too much. Naruto grimaced in her head. The burns were dark, second degree at best, third at worst. She truly didn't want to worry Haku. She was so thoughtful and meticulous in everything she did and would go numerous sleepless nights just to ensure Naruto was completely healed by the time they would leave. She cared too much to let something simple worry her. Something deep in the back of her mind practically barked at her, knowing that the burning could cause severe damage, but still Naruto happily smiled through the pain, moved towards the hunter nin looking for some sweet loot. They don't need it anymore anyways. Naruto and Haku now dressed in the armor the hunter nin had worn. Since it had seals to conform to any body shape, it was very easy to slip on. It mirrored the Anbu personal's armor, with forearm guards, armored fingerless gloves with shin guards and a chest plate, all made to be pitch black by Konoha standards. Naruto as well kept her slashed Konoha forehead protector proudly around her neck. Naruto glanced over towards Haku as they flew through the trees, each branch not even slightly moving at their footfalls. Each and every movement precise and calculated for ease of traveling. While Haku was trained in the arts of the ninja extensively over multiple years, Naruto had grown up without that kind of influence. She had developed her own system of bounding off of the trees and traversing them with her own spiritual energy, and while not as advanced as the chakra way, it still functioned similarly. Every motion of her blade was half self-taught and half learned from Shirayuki-chan. She had to persevere through every moment of nearly blood-curdling pain from the overuse of her muscles, the intense burning coming from her lungs during her stamina training. Even the fractured limbs when she overexerted herself and slammed into trees or boulders. Which happened far too many times for her to like to remember. In a sense, Naruto kind of envied Haku. While she did grow up in horrible conditions, and her father of course being the murderous fool he was. But she ended up having a wonderful if strict mentor and learned everything she wanted at a proper pace. Naruto had none of that. She was ignored, shunned for her younger brother who was so high and mighty because he could use the damnable chakra that she could simply not attain. If I could make a wish, would I want to go back to them if they would care like I always wanted? Naruto shook her head. No, I have already seen their ugly sides far too long. It would be impossible for me to forgive them like that just because of a wish. Naruto sighed gently, like usual, a fine mist escaping her lungs. She had noticed, not only did the amount of the crystalline ice increase with her mastery of her Zanpakuto, but so did her natural body temperature. Her body slowly became colder and much more used to the cold the stronger she got. It has taken a long time, but she was slowly coming to realize, her power was not truly the power to create and manipulate ice, but each time she released her Zanpakuto she felt her body temperature plummet. If she pushed herself it would plummet further and her range and effectiveness would increase, but her body would suffer adverse effects if she did not take extra steps to cool off or heat up in her case. She worked hard fine-tuning that as well. Naruto was extremely determined. She needed to get stronger, she needed everything she could gain in order to protect those she considered precious to her. To protect Naruto? Naruto slipped from the branch, missing her mark by a centimeter and went toppling down to the ground below with a light eep. Haku's eyes widened and she darted down, getting below the free-falling blur of red and white that was Naruto and catching her in her arms. Haku looked into the violet orbs owned by Naruto as she blushed and seemed to shrink into Haku's arms. Hey Tilda. Haku shook her head, reckless. Naruto huffed and turned her head, her blush deepening ever so slightly. I was thinking, you caught me off guard Tilda? Haku turned her nose upwards, and if I was an enemy ninja? Naruto smiled and leaned her head into Haku's chest. That's why I have you Tilda. This time Haku felt a blush spreading over her cheeks as she stood Naruto up. HMPH. That's right. Someone's gotta take care of you when your head is in the clouds Tilda. Naruto giggled as she followed to the slowly moving form of Haku. Well, Yuki-chan was looking out for me with our senses, but I will always need you Haku Tilda. Naruto heard a light evil giggle from the back of her mind and blushed heavily. You heard nothing. Yuki simply waved her off, short Tilda. Naruto slid her hands onto her long sleeve and held her hands up to her face hiding her blush. Evil ice me. Naruto was not currently in her inner plane but she could tell Yuki-chan was sticking her tongue out at her. Her inner thoughts were interrupted abruptly by Haku who tugged on her hair gently. Naruto squeaked and stopped quickly, almost tumbling back as a shiver ran down her spine. She let out a shaky breath before composing herself and turning around to face Haku. Haku leaned forward grinning, wanting to get some teasing out of this. What was that I heard Tilda? I believe it may have been a squeak, and even a trembling breath Tilda. Naruto stepped back and grabbed her wrist behind her back. I have no clue what you are talking about. Haku leaned closer. Oh? Is that true Tilda? Because I think you liked that little tug far more than you will admit Tilda. Naruto continued to back up trying to escape the situation. She couldn't take her eyes off that cute smile. Naruto simply could not will her head to look away from the cute little teasing smile Haku had as she continued to pursue her, until Naruto was finally forced against a tree, a victim of her own unawareness. Haku grinned as she gently pressed against Naruto. Well, I suppose I can't force it out of you Tilda. Naruto blushed deeply. Damn you, you are practically purring. How can I resist such a tactic Tilda? Haku hummed softly and leaned her head a little closer, gently pressing her lips against Naruto's cheek. They stayed that way for a few moments, both hearts beating 1,000 times a second before Haku pulled away. Well, I suppose I will let you have this one. But in the end I know what I heard Tilda. Naruto stammered a few times, trying so hard to find words to speak as Haku backed off with a smile. Looks like we are right over the ridge to the village. I am glad we got those maps, the land of forests is so confusing. Naruto's heart was beating heavily in her chest as she tried to form words coherently. Why yeah, let's just sit here for a moment and prepare ourselves. We want to look good to meet the Daimyo. Yata, a coherent sentence. Deep in her head she heard, peefed, coherent? Naruto simply growled in her head. Haku nodded. I suppose so. Blood is not in fashion these days. Naruto giggled lightly as she pushed herself off the tree. Her bodily finally relaxed a bit, so she moved over and wrapped an arm around Haku, staring up at the rather large hill. It's nice being around someone you can trust. Thank you so much for giving me this. Haku smiled and returned the gesture. It's been my pleasure. You are one of a kind Naruto. These last few months have been wonderful. I really wish that Zabuza-sama could have lived. Despite his tough exterior I could tell he truly cared. But I know you tired as hard as you could. So thank you Naruto. Naruto smiled and leaned her head on Haku's shoulder. I am so happy to have someone like you. It is the best feeling in the world. Despite the frequent attacks, all the blood and even the thoughts of my life plaguing my thoughts. You have been a breath of fresh air. It is the most wonderful feeling I have ever experienced. Haku gently placed a hand on her head and leaned her head back onto Naruto's head. And like that they relaxed their minds and bodies for a few hours. Letting themselves fall into a light slumber for a couple hours. The pair of ice users were heading slowly for the capital of the land of forests. Naruto slowly rotated her head, letting a low crack sound out from her joints. She let out a slight whine. Couldn't we have slept a little longer Tilda? Haku shook her head with a sigh. I already told you, we were expected yesterday. We cannot keep them waiting too long Naruto. Naruto simply let out a sigh and waved her hand lightly. Yes, tilde, I know tilde, but it still does not change the fact that I want sleep. I was so comfy too. Haku giggled lightly and moved closer to her. Gently she ran her fingers through her hair to get out the numerous tangles and knots, making her hair a total mess. You should also look more presentable when meeting a daimyo. Naruto giggled lightly, sure tilde, because the daimyo cares so much about what a pair of missing nin looks like tilde. Haku finished her impromptu hair brushing, then raised a finger to her chin and thought. They probably would. They are very much big on manners and even pay heavily on appearance and power alike. Naruto groaned lowly as the walls of the capital were closing in fairly quickly. They were walking, but it was also fairly close to where they were resting. She was still tired, but in the end she could still be polite. She was born into a noble family, so she picked up on numerous mannerisms to keep her own in a place of diplomacy. As they saw the gates getting closer and closer, they noticed that there was over 50 samurai all over the top of the gates and around the gate. It was honestly fairly respectable for a small country. However, they do have a decently sized capital. Naruto moved forward to the guard waiting with an outstretched hand, stopping with Haku staying half a meter behind her. Naruto looked up into the mont's eyes, though she twitched internally since she was almost half a meter smaller than him. He held a hand on his blade and spoke with a deep, heavy tone. Name, reason for entering and home of residence. Naruto. Meeting with the daimyo under a contract. I am a wanderer along with my partner. The guard nodded. I see, the missing nin. You are lucky we do not want dead to another shinobi village. Head inside, it is the 5-story tower. The daimyo will be on the first floor reception room. On the mass of cushions. Naruto nodded her head and headed through the slowly opening gates. As they headed through the town, they took note of the absolute lockdown there was in the city. Everyone in the city was in their houses, preparing for what insanity would come. Haku gently placed a hand on her shoulder, making Naruto glance back at her. She noticed Haku's caring eyes. Naruto frowned and gently wrapped an arm around her. It's all right, let's keep going. Haku nodded and they separated, continuing to move down the barren street. It only took a few minutes to finally reach the bustling tower. They took notice of the constant movement of the soldiers. They were ready for war. Naruto made to move into the building where she was met with a number of swords being drawn. She held her hands up in the air slightly, followed by Haku. It only took a moment for the men to sheath their blades, knowing by their clothes that they were the pair of missing nin they hired. Naruto moved swiftly up to the throne, stopping a couple meters from the throne and doing a gentle curtsy, followed closely by Haku. Naruto and Haku Yuki reporting for a mission sent by messenger bird for us. We understand there is a rebellion at play. The daimyo, a young man with an extravagant hat and beautiful flowing robes, perched his head in his hand. His posture relaxed but was clearly worried by the quick jittering eye movements. Yes, a number of our soldiers and some nin have banded together to overthrow me. They have been angered over my dismissal of their plea for a ninja village to be established. I do not want to be included in the petty squabbles of the ninja world. We are a farming and trading culture and I intend to keep it that way. When a new daimyo steps in to take my place, they can make that decision, but I stand by my own. So that brings me to your employment. I need at least 2 powerful enough shinobi to ward off the group 5 shinobi that dare ally themselves with the traitors. Besides that, my samurai can easily decimate the lines of defectors. Naruto glanced towards Haku and nodded questioningly, to which Haku nodded back with a small smile. Naruto smiled back and turned towards the daimyo and nodded again. Very well, we are prepared to strike them down with extreme prejudice. The daimyo smiled. Thank you very much. I will ensure you are well compensated for your troubles and will provide you with the amenities you need. My general is in the room to your left. Consult with him for more details on locations and the like. Do ask if you need anything else. Naruto did another curtsy and immediately headed to the room to the left, followed closely by Haku. As they walked, Haku immediately struck up a conversation. How long do you think this will last? Naruto hummed and thought, perhaps a couple months. Maybe just a few days. Not sure yet, I want to get a grasp on what the current situation is before I say. Haku nodded and both went silent once again as they entered what seemed to be a fairly newly added war room, complete with a large table and maps placed everywhere. In the center of the room, surrounded by bustling samurai, was a man with a more intricately designed armor. Instead of the black samurai armor, this man wore red, signifying his rank as general. They immediately walked over to him and looked down at the map of the country he was reviewing, little flags placed along it, some red X's drawn on, and a little castle where the village was. "Hello, I have heard much about you. I have read your bingo book entry. Impressive that you are already marked as an A-rank threat. You have accomplished quite a bit in your short run from your village." She smiled graciously. "Thank you very much. Bounty hunting is the only good way for me to make money, and the only good ones are high-ranking." He seemed to nod understandingly. In the end, he had no room to judge. His profession was pretty much murder-based anyways. "Well, I am not so sure how adept at wartime strategy you are, but I can run you through everything we know and the numerous attacks that they have employed up until now." Naruto nodded and crossed her arms and nodded for him to continue. He pointed at 4 of the little flags and started speaking. "They have established numerous tactical encampments in order to confuse us. We had managed to get a few bits of intel by sending out some scouts. They have over 18 small encampments, only 4 of which are occupied. The others are distractions in order to throw us off their tails. They have 400 samurai, of the which only 200 are ours and the other 200 consist of ronin. There are 5 shinobi, 4 B ranked, which are listed by their names in the bingo book. 2 are from the Kiri, 1 from Kumo, 1 from Iwa. All of which have their village's standard natures. The last one is the A-rank shinobi listed in the bingo book as the Swift Ninja Fuma. He is one of the few swift release users alive today, and he is very dangerous." He continued, "So far the attacks have been rather complicated. War drums pounding as if an army is marching towards our front gate, only to find some 10 or so soldiers retreating when our army opens up. That time we had a pincer attack from the east and west gates which killed over 80 soldiers and caused large-scale damages before our army drove them off. There has been attacks by arrows and even small instances of guerrilla warfare. They are smart. Our biggest issue right now is, despite our still 1,200 strong army, we still have trouble mobilizing due to their heavy reliance on guerrilla warfare." Naruto took a moment to look over the map and then started pointing at 1 flag, 2 flags away from the center flag, 2 of the outer ones, and finally 1 almost 300 meters from the city. "Those are occupied, right?" He nodded, astonished. "How did you know?" Naruto pointed to all the other flags as she started speaking. "As I was looking this over, I noticed that each one of them was placed in ways that would draw your attention to other camps. I noticed that it would create trends, and often it could lead to loops because of how large the loops of camps are. There, however, is a big sore thumb to me in which they put 4 camps way out from those feedback loops that are the bait. However, your scouts probably already figured that out, and that is why you can tell me 4 are accounted for. However, I must ask, have your scouts given headcounts?" The general rubbed a hand over his face. "Yes. And that confuses us the most, as the fact of the matter is 2 of the B-rank shinobi and Fuma are unaccounted for, along with 150 soldiers. We can't figure out where they could be hiding." Naruto grinned. "Just as I thought." She immediately pointed to a cliffside that was practically on the border of the land of marshes. "That point right there is the absolute perfect spot for an encampment of a small army. Close enough to regroup with the bulk forces and close enough to a border to dissuade anyone from marching an army over to it. I want a message sent to marshes informing them of the basics as soon as a small scouting party is sent to confirm." "Good?" She looked back up to the general's wide-eyed face before he nodded and quickly barked out some orders to some of the samurai in the room. Naruto smiled and turned. "Have a nice day. Please inform me when the scouting party returns." "Daddy? Daddy, can you start training me today?" A young Naruto, about 7 years of age, tugged on the back of her father's pant leg with pleading eyes. Minato let out a low and deliberate sigh before waving her off. "Naruto, I already told you, you have no chakra. There is no possible way for you to become a ninja. I will hear none of this anymore." Naruto hung her head low and slowly walked off. Digging through the trash, Naruto pulled out what looked to be the nearly tattered remnants of a cheap katana. Its blade chipped all along itself and the guard was nearly falling off, the lace of the handle completely gone, leaving only the tang. She had saw the previous owner toss it in there earlier and decided something was better than nothing. Grinning excitedly, she hugged the blade tightly. Its blade was almost impossibly dull, so she had little issue with it. Happily, she stood back up and trotted off the blade in hand towards a secluded area in the woods to begin her self-instated regimen. Blood dripped from her hands as Naruto dropped to the ground. "I can't go on." Her body was practically splattered with blood emanating from every inch of her body. In front of her prone form was the remnants of just about 12 trees. Each of her limbs were bleeding slowly over the grass, and every breath she took in caused her body to tremble. Red eyes scrawled over her fallen form for a few moments and took in the situation. They looked over each of the fallen trees and the clear pieces of wood lodged in her arms. A fairly deep sigh drew out from his lips as he dropped down silently and pulled a medical kit from his pouch and got to work removing the splinters and wrapping the wounds. It took an hour of work on his part to actually patch the wounds up and set the bones she had broken on her rampage against all of treekind. She had wounds all along her arms and legs, focusing heavily on her forearms and shins. She was clearly doing endurance and pain training. Though what confused him the most was her hair. Deep dark red, almost identical to the Hokage's wife. Though slightly darker, the only ones in the village to attain a shade like this would be the daughter of the Hokage. That begs the question, why is she out here training by herself? Finally he crossed his legs and settled into a meditative state to wait for her to awake. Naruto slowly pushed herself up from her prone position with a groan. She was extremely tired and knew she had overdone it quite a bit with her training, but she knew that the payoff would come with time and effort. She pushed herself back and against a stump when she finally noticed the man who was silently watching her from his relaxed position. She leaned her head back with a sigh. "Who are you?" He continued to stare her down for a few more moments before answering. "My name is Itachi Uchiha." Naruto giggled lightly before looking up into his charcoal black eyes. "Alright, little weasel Tilda." He cracked a little smirk at that before replying, "Fair enough, fishcake." At that Naruto burst out laughing, heavily amused by the banter. "Well then, how do you know my name?" He let a small smile grace his features. "You're the daughter of the 4th Hokage, how would I not? May I ask what you were doing so far away from the village laying in the carnage of these innocent trees?" Naruto leaned back and rolled her eyes. "I have to train somehow." Itachi's smile slowly faded into a frown. "Does your father not train you?" "How old are you?" She growled lowly before letting out a slow sigh. "My father deems me too weak to be effectively trained due to my lack of chakra. And I am 7. He gave her an odd look for a few moments then nodded. "Well, you do not have chakra, however there is something deep within you. I do not know what, but something is buried inside you. I recommend meditation to become one with yourself, maybe then you will find it." Naruto stood stunned for a few moments before asking, "How do you know that?" He smiled and winked. "I have my ways, maybe I will explain it to you one day." She lowered her head for a moment before looking him in the eye. "Alright, thank you. I will start meditation and bring myself to higher levels." Standing up, Itachi nodded. "Good, keep going at it like that and I have no doubt that you will reach great heights." With that he turned and disappeared in a burst of crows. Naruto's eyes snapped open, glancing around her surrounding for a few moments before sitting up. She glanced towards the clock on the bed stand next to her. It was 2 in the morning. Not a normal time for people to be awake, but she could already tell it would not be an option to head back to sleep. Getting up, she flattened the wrinkles out of her shirt and moved over to the fridge and got herself a bottle of water. Taking a small drink, she climbed back onto the bed and crossed her legs in her normal meditative position. Gently placing her elbow on her leg and propping her head up on her hand, she looked over Haku contemplatively. She had very deep feelings for the brunette. Ones that went beyond simple friends. She knew that. Haku herself probably realized it by now. She just had no clue how to feel about that. Same relationships were practically evil in the elemental nations, and she also had no clue where her feelings were coming from. Why does she feel like this? What happened to cause her to jump to such feelings in such a short period of time? Why was she in a state where over such a short period of time Haku can already make her heart try and burst from her chest? She wanted so much to ignore these feelings, to walk away from such feelings and allow herself to simply love Haku as family. But it seems such a task is incredibly difficult. The more she looked over Haku, the more she started to realize she was enjoying her view far too much. Haku did not have much when it came to sleeping wear, and Naruto herself wore very little to bed herself. wearing only fairly large shirts to bed to cover her modesty should someone be sleeping in the same room as her, so it just happens Haku is wearing the same. Biting her lip gently, she turned away, trying to ignore the growing heat in her stomach. This isn't right. A deep sigh came from inside her mind, and Naruto knew that Yuki wanted to speak. She closed her eyes and drew herself into her own mind. Yuki stared on at the materializing Naruto with sympathy in her eyes. What isn't right about the situation? Naruto lowered her head slightly. This whole situation. I have only known her for a few months, and to add to that matter, we are both female. Yuki nodded slowly before replying, yes. But in reality, what truly is wrong with the situation? Perhaps others frown upon your thoughts and wants, but it is your wants, not theirs. Who are they to dictate your wants and needs? Naruto slowly sat down, thinking over the situation. But it still means that we will still not be accepted, ostracized. Yuki frowned slightly. Are you not already ostracized? The look of shock spread over her features before turning her head to the side. But I have only known her for a short time. How can I just open up like that? Yuki slowly lowered herself down to her knees and gently wrapped an arm around her. Listen, Lady Naruto. You have your wants and needs. I know you bottle them up for your own morals, Sake, and ignore them. You should at least try to fulfill some of them without the thought of morals forcing your hand. You are 15 years old, you have tasted blood and battle. You are an adult in every way imaginable. Take that to heart and understand you are free now. Looking up into Yuki's eyes, Naruto spoke softly. Am I really an adult? Smiling, Yuki nodded. In every way. Maybe not done growing, but definitely ready to take on the responsibilities of an adult. Naruto still seemed hesitant. But what if she doesn't feel the same as I do? What if I ruin everything? My only precious person. My only love. What if I lose everything? Yuki gently tousled Naruto's hair with a smile. Give it a little time. Do not wait long, but give it some time. Think things over and ease yourself into it. She seemed to stare into space for a moment before closing her eyes and wordlessly fading away. Naruto opened her eyes once again to be greeted by Haku in an even more compromising position. Sprawled out across her bed, legs wide open, allowing her view of her underwear and the image of her breasts pressing through the shirt that caused Naruto's face to flare up. Oh God! That familiar warm sensation spread through her stomach again, and she released an unsteady breath. Reaching over to place the water bottle down on the nightstand, but it still being dark, she released the bottle on the edge, making it clatter to the ground. She eeked quietly and moved to get a towel. As she was cleaning the mess, she heard a low yawn from Haku. Naruto? Throwing the slightly damp towel to the corner of the room, she sat back down on her bed and replied. Yes? Haku sat up, rubbing her eye. What's wrong? Bad dreams again? Naruto awkwardly confirmed. Yeah, just a bit. Not too bad. She was having trouble composing herself and ridding herself of her own arousal. Haku instantly took notice of the drawn-out sentence and got up from her position groggily, moved over to her bed and sat down. Gently placing her arms around Naruto and tightly squeezing her. It's okay. I am here for you. Naruto's heart started pounding as Haku drew her close. Her face lit up brightly and she almost stalled mentally. The feeling of her body being so close. The warmth she held and smooth feeling of her skin. The feeling of her chest pressing against hers almost drove her crazy. Thanks. Haku pulled away slightly and looked into Naruto's eyes. What's wrong? Are you red? Are you getting sick? She shook her head quickly and let out a forced giggle. And no, nothing like that. Haku placed a hand on the space of the bed between them and placed a hand on Naruto's head. You are a bit warm though. Haku pulled back slightly before finally noticing. Her hand that was on the bed was warm. Raising it up to her face, she looked at it oddly, and Naruto immediately realized what happened. When she sat down away from her original position, and with all the thoughts going through her head, she must have stained the sheets a bit. Closing and opening her fingers a few times, she found it was both warm and slightly sticky. Naruto? What is this? Naruto blushed deeply and turned away. I have no clue. It took a few moments for Haku to slowly realize exactly what was on her hand. Her eyes drifted down to the area between Naruto's legs, noticing her lack of panties. Why you were touching yourself, right? Covering her face with her hand, Naruto shook her head vigorously. No, I was just in the mood. I didn't do anything, I swear. Haku bit her lip gently and wrapped her arms around Naruto. And gently whispered into her ear. No need to be embarrassed. I assure you I do not judge. Naruto's mind was moving 100 miles a second with thoughts. Her body felt like fire and she felt an overwhelming desire to touch her. To simply feel her body close to her own. Her body quivered under the feeling of her body being so close. Naruto in a fit of uncontrollable desire rolled over and pushed Haku down. Her bright violet eyes glowing in the low light with pure desire. Barely a whisper Naruto spoke, I love you. Her fingers curled around her wrists and she applied a small bit of pressure. Her lower area dripping lightly onto Haku's thigh while her body trembled lightly and her eyes glowed brighter. Haku's eyes were wide with shock. What? You love me? A shiver went down her spine as she stared into her bright orbs that were filled with pure want and desire. And like a switch Naruto's eyes dulled again and widened. Again in the low whisper she spoke, I am so sorry. And like that she blurred to her belt and blurred away again, leaving the open window being the only trace of her exit. Haku slowly moved back against the headboard and held her chest. Did she just say that? Did she just do that? Her hands slowly lowered between her thighs, gently feeling herself. The hot wet fluid had soaked through her underwear and was starting to slide down her thighs. She breathed out a low unsteady breath and moved to her scrolls for a change of underwear. She loves me. Her cheeks reddened at the thought. Break. Naruto held her head tightly. She was hunched over at a river, tears rolling down her face. Why did I do that? Why couldn't I control myself? What came over me? A loud cheerful giggle emanated throughout her skull. You held everything in for far too long. I saw it all. The hate, anger, desire, all of it held deep inside and never released. That is why I exist, Tilda. Another loud giggle rung in her head loudly. Who is that? Who? Naruto frantically tried to look into her mindscape with only the briefest glances at a deep white blizzard. The giggle continued to drone on in her own mind. I am the one who was born of your desires, hate, and energy. I am the one you locked away, the one who couldn't take it anymore. The tone became slowly and more deliberate, the one that wanted revenge, and like that it all stopped. The giggling, the voice, the droning, all of it simply stopped. With only a lingering thought. Soon, slowly 2 hands ran through the golden locks belonging to the 4th Hokage Minato Namikaze. First his son was brought back nearly dead from a giant slash across his chest and numerous burns from his usage of the Kyuubi's chakra. Then he was informed the slash was caused by his own daughter, who apparently used the confusion of battle to escape with the apprentice of Zabuza to God knows where. It was insanely stressful and it really brought many headaches. He was forced into the situation of marking his own daughter in the bingo book and sending Hunter Nin after her. The problem being out of the 4 squads he sent out none have ever returned, which really brought up questions directed at him. Asking what she could do. But in all honesty he had no clue. As all of these questions were fired off he slowly started to realize how little he knew. Since she was 7 he had almost never spoken to her. He had not trained her nor really communicated at all to her. He had no clue what she was capable of, nor did anyone really. She had questioned Kakashi and through his clear disapproval in his eyes he answered he was no quite sure, but that she was incredibly adept with a blade. He put her down as a B-rank threat for the moment because he had no clue what to rank her as. Because of the fact 4 squads of Hunter Nin are now missing, he was actually contemplating raising it to a, but at the same time he wanted to dodge around anything that may endanger her. She was his daughter after all. There was already so much pressure from the council that was forcing his hand. He just hoped that she could survive out there in the world. Sitting around the 9 rookie genin all somberly ate their food, idly chatting. Kento seemed the most silent of the bunch. Silently picking at his food, really contemplating something. Finally Kiba looked over towards him. Yo, you good, Ken? He sighed slowly and nodded. Yeah, I am fine. Just a lot on my mind. Kiba frowned. About your sister, huh? Kento nodded. Yeah, I always called her weak throughout our childhood, and that was all thrown to the wind when in just a split second she cut me down without the slightest of hesitation. Even with the Kyuubi's chakra it was not enough. I would have died if it wasn't for the residual chakra from that damn fox. All because of that masked bitch that corrupted her mind. She turned away from all of us and left. Ino propped her head on her hand and spoke. Do you think it was entirely that masked ninja? He looked over confusedly. Yeah, why would it be anything different? Ino looked at him oddly for a moment. Well, she technically had no true ties to this village. Perhaps that nin convinced her somehow? Maybe it was her idea? Kento growled lowly. No way, she has her family here. Ka-san, Tu-san, and me. Why would she ever leave? Shikamaru held his head. You said it yourself. You constantly talked down to her, calling her weak and pathetic. Why would she stay? No friends, abusive family, sounds like a recipe for disaster if you ask me. He glared directly at Shikamaru and his eyes shifted between him and Ino. Slamming his fist down into the table, everyone thought he was about to snap. His mouth was half open before he slowly slumped down. I'm sorry. You're right. Tears started to drop from his face. I did this. We did this. Me and my family. We drove her away, ignored her. We did all of this without a second thought. I have to bring her back. I can't let this happen. Raising his head and straightening up, he wiped away his tears. I will bring her back. No matter the cost. He stood. I am going to talk to father. Walking through the door to the Hokage's office, Kento sat down at the seat in front of his father's and stared him intently in the eye. We need to talk about Oni-chan. His father's eyes softened considerably. I understand. Pressing a buzzer on his desk, he spoke into the little microphone. Push back any meetings for an hour. I have a pressing issue to attend to. Kento closed his eyes for a moment before reopening them. I want to go after her. Minato shook his head. I cannot currently allow that. I need you stronger before we can even contemplate that. At the moment, Naruto has shown unprecedented strength for her. And we need to understand it better to determine her threat. I just sent a message to Jiraiya and will have him search her out and attempt to capture. But for the moment, I will be increasing your training and pull you off missions for the next 3 months until the Chunin exams, where you will compete, and only after will you resume missions. If I deem you strong enough to pose a challenge to her, I will allow you a special mission along with any of your team who agree. Deal? Kento felt a small bit of anger rise up before he caught himself again. Yes, father. I will be waiting in the courtyard for your arrival. Minato had just finished painting the seals along his clone's body and allowed his clone to lay down. Holding his palms over his clone's body, he looked over at his wife, Kushina. I will be indisposed for 3 days. Inform my secretary and Kento of the fact and that I will send a clone each day from now to then. Kushina smiled. Of course. Let's go on a date before you leave though. When we leave, we won't have any free time. Minato let a smile slide in and nodded. Sure, honey. Minato sighed, slowly rubbing his eyes gently as he stretched his back out on the bed. His shadow clone now loaded with enough chakra to stay active for 4 months. He needed to be in total seclusion to train Kento in his Kyuubi chakra mode, and to do that he will be bringing him to Mount Myoboko, the realm of the toads, for 3 months. He wanted to have extra time, so he decided to pump another month's worth into the clone. He had to take a good 2 days to recover, but in the end it would be worth it. Standing up, he slipped a shirt on with a determined look in his eye. Time to go. Haku glanced around the room worriedly. She had been waiting for Naruto for about an hour. It took her a while to understand the situation before she realized how Naruto felt. She finally realized that the way she had reacted was insensitive. When that confession was released, Naruto had thought Haku was shocked at the very premise, which was not the case. She trembled slightly as everything came crashing down on her. She immediately got up and got a few things together. She filled a mug with some coffee. If she knew one thing about Naruto, it was that if you wanted to apologize, a cup of coffee was the best way to start. She quickly snapped the lid on and dashed out the window. Stopping on the roof, she took a moment to feel out the familiar feeling Naruto always gave off. Only then did she feel the dim feeling of her. But only basic one. Above it all was a maelstrom of insane fluctuations despite the suppression she was applying to it. She made her way towards her, jumping through trees only to find a small clearing. She heard soft sobbing and near silent shrieks from the curled up Naruto. She was using her cloak as a makeshift blanket to cover herself as she gently rocked back and forth. She mumbled slowly and methodically between sobs. Why, everything is ruined. She let out a stream of tears as she raised her hands to her hair and tugged viciously at it. Her head was pounding and she could not get the ever-present thoughts out of her mind. She had forced Haku down in a downright rapey way and proclaimed love out of thin air. In her mind, she had ruined the one thing that she had wanted so badly. She couldn't even comprehend the thought that it may be reciprocated. She could not even understand the thought of that at the moment. Her mind was stuck on a feedback loop of emotions, and each time it passed her thoughts again it hurt even more than before. Haku looked down at the sight and a tear escaped her eye. She jumped down and softly made her way towards Naruto. She slowly knelt down in front of her and gently put her hand to her cheek, snapping her out of her daze. She let out a startled gasp and her eyes went wide as she scrabbled backwards into a tree trunk. "No, I am sorry. Please, I won't ever bother you again. I should never have done that." She shivered in her cloak as she tightened her grip on the edges. "I'll never bother you again." The words she spoke seemed to drive her into even more tears as she sobbed into her cloak. Haku was heartbroken at the sight. Someone she so admired for strength and resilience being brought into this state by such a misunderstanding. Haku moved forward again. "Naruto, please don't do this, you did nothing wrong." Her eyes peeked out from her cloak, red and puffy from her crying. She sniffed and shuffled back. "I ruined everything. I destroyed what could have been because of my stupid body. I just wanted something I could never have." She sunk deeper into her cloak. Haku moved up and gently ran a hand through her hair. "Naruto, please come out of the cloak." Slowly she peeked out. "I don't want to hurt you. I don't want to lose you, Haku. It's all my fault." Haku shook her head. "No, it isn't." She held up the coffee cup towards Naruto. "Here, talk with me without the cloak, turtle, and you can have your coffee. Black, dark roast, just like you like it." Naruto sniffled slightly, her mind slowly starting to see reason again. She gently released her grip on her cloak and reached out for the cup. Haku smiled as she let Naruto take it. She tentatively took a sip from the cup and let the warm sensation travel through her body. Looking up at Haku, she still felt tears rolling down her face. She kept staring into the beautiful silver eyes of the one person she adored and cherished, and yet she knew she would never be able to see those eyes in the way she craved. Haku gently ran her fingers through her hair, attempting to calm Naruto down. It was a tactic that Haku had found very effective when Naruto crawled into bed with her every now and again when she had woken up from nightmares. Naruto was almost the perfect human version of a cat in many regards, especially in this one. Haku smiled gently. "Listen. You did not mess anything up. I don't blame you for anything. You teased me so much through our travels that I never realized your affection towards me. I've had thoughts of my own, but I never really thought to act on them. Last night when you did that I was so shocked that I could barely realize what was happening. Please forgive me, but you honestly did nothing wrong, Naruto." Naruto's eyes widened as she leaned a little closer. But I pinned you down." Haku held a finger up to her mouth. "You were pent up and frustrated. You didn't do anything bad, and you had self-control. Please don't blame yourself for this. It was also my fault for not being clear." Naruto hung her head as she spoke, her cheeks reddening. I just feel such overwhelming feelings when I am around you. I just can't help but want to be in your arms. I feigned nightmares sometimes. It felt so good to be in your arms that I just wanted to be there every now and again." Haku smiled and moved closer, gently wrapping her arms around Naruto and slowly placing her chin onto her shoulder. "It's okay. I always liked when you crawled into bed with me. You were always so comfy and you always kept me cool under the blankets." Naruto slowly set the cup on the ground and pulled Haku into a tight hug as she nuzzled into her neck. I want to be with you so bad. Do you think that would be okay?" Haku slowly pulled away and Naruto's heart dropped. Thoughts ran through her head a mile a minute and she was about ready to burst into tears. But then Haku pushed her lips into Naruto's. Her head spun. She could taste the sweet taste of honey from Haku's morning coffee and the slight bitterness as well, and the smell of tulips and roses that Haku loved picking whenever she found them. It took a mere moment for the moment to sink in and for Naruto to push back into the kiss, letting her arms wrap around Haku's neck and pull her deeper into the act. Haku herself was rather enthralled with the feeling. Her heart was pounding and she felt adrenaline rush through her veins. The bitter taste all along Naruto's tongue from her coffee mixed with mint from her habits of eating mint anything culminated into a wonderful taste, and the feeling of Naruto pulling her atop her sent waves of excitement down her spine. Finally they pulled away and just lied there, staring into each other's eyes for what seemed like an eternity. Naruto smiled and pulled her tight, nuzzling deep into her neck. "I love you. Truly I do. I can't imagine a life where I haven't met you." Haku slowly snuggled in and took in the scent of her hair and nodded softly. I love you too. Just make sure you talk to me. Nodding her head in return, she closed her eyes, enjoying the embrace. Let's just stay here for a little while. Enjoy nature a bit. Haku let out a giggle in response. Okay. Naruto and Haku sat upon the gate overlooking the large stretch of roads weaving about trees. Silently preparing their gear, Naruto turned from her blade, finally done with polishing it. Haku. Naruto paused mid-sentence and looked towards the ground. Am I good enough? Am I good enough to protect her? Am I good enough for her to stay with me? Am I good enough to keep her safe if she is with me? Slightly snapping out of her daze, she found Haku's hand on her shoulder, her caring eyes peering down into Naruto's. Naruto, are you alright? Naruto shook her head lightly before raising her eyes up to meet Haku's and paused. Her voice caught in her throat. After a couple moments, Naruto forced her words through. Unable to stop the question, Naruto felt her soul crashing down in her body. Am I good enough for you? Haku's breath caught in her throat. Her body trembled slightly as her body fell to its knees. Her bright silver eyes stared straight into Naruto's dark violet eyes. Naruto. You. Quickly pulling Naruto in her arms. You are not anything less than amazing. I couldn't have asked for anyone else to walk with. Naruto slowly wrapped her arms around Haku and gently nuzzled into her neck. I'm sorry. I just have trouble understanding all of this sometimes. Haku gently pulled away with a smile on her face. Don't worry. We can work through this all. We have plenty of time to do everything. Naruto giggled lightly and playfully pushed her shoulder. Of hush, you sweet-talking harlot Tilda. Haku grinned. Oh Tilda, so that is what you think of me, Tilda, a harlot of all things. She playfully crossed her arms and turned away with a grin. Naruto grinned and gently wrapped her arms around Haku's body, gently setting her cheek on her shoulder to look up into her eyes. The cutest harlot I ever seen, Tilda. Haku stuck her tongue out at her and swiveled around on her heel. Get everything ready, Tilda wouldn't want to be caught with everything laid out like an auction, Tilda. Naruto pouted lightly. Fine, Tilda. She popped back down and got everything together, slowly strapping the weathered pouch to her thigh and sliding a few of the blades on. Naruto wasn't a big fan of the throwing weapons shinobi tended to use, but she could at least understand their use and apply it when she found it useful. She usually preferred to simply cut people down with her blade. So much simpler in the long run. Haku finally finished strapping up when she finally moved back over to Naruto, gently slipping one of the scrolls out from her belt. I may need this later. Naruto reached for the place where the scroll was held before turning back quickly. Are you sure? Haku nodded. I have been taught well, I know it like the back of my hand. Naruto shook her head. No, I mean, are you sure you will? She stopped when a hand gently pressed against her cheek. Haku smiled gently. I will be fine, I promise. We are in this together. Naruto nodded. Right, we are in this together. Haku smiled and moved over to the edge of the wall, swinging her legs over the side, looking over the beautiful landscape. Soon Naruto joined her, looking over the edge into the deep expanding forest. Smiling, Naruto gently placed her hands behind herself and leaned back. It's comforting, relaxing at a time like this. It really shows how far we have come, and how far we can still go. Haku took a moment to take in the scenery and nodded slowly. I suppose it does. Have we really come that far though? Naruto laughed and shook her head. No, we have barely even made baby steps. We have a long way to go. I believe that there is so much more for us out there in this vast world of ours. Haku smiled and turned her head to face Naruto, causing Naruto to respond in kind. There they stood as minutes ticked. Time practically melting away into an endless void where nothing mattered. Haku finally giggled gently. You always know the right words to say, don't you? Naruto smiled. Perhaps. Or perhaps I just think too much. Naruto turned her head out into the clearing when she smelt smoke. And as she focused more, she could hear the pounding of war drums. She quickly turned her head to face Haku. Quick, inform the Daimyo, have him retreat into the panic room, and have him mobilize his forces for a flanking attack going from the west gate in a roundabout. 2 clicks. I will go ahead and meet them on the front lines to make them think they are facing me alone. Be quick and back me up. I can only stall those 5 ninja for so long. Turning back to face the now visible army of soldiers marching and pounding their war drums. Haku moved quickly down to the daimyo's tower. Naruto took a deep breath and counted out the 5 ninja, making note of the one at the head of the group who was clearly more heavily armed. With short green hair, a sturdy armor chestplate as well as guards on both his shins and forearms. A nice blade hung from his waist and he held himself with serious composure. She pegged him for the leader and shook her head. What good leader stands at the front? It is comparative to organizational failure once he falls. She gently flipped up her hood, gently covering her eyes, and Naruto took a deep breath and then like the wind she blurred deep into the fray. She appeared behind one of the 4 lieutenants and almost like nothing his head dropped to the floor. She breathed out a fine mist softly speaking, her voice near silent as a mouse. Dance, Soda no Shirayuki. A wave of freezing air rushed away from her body, making each and every soldier shiver in their armor. Only then did the 4 ninja turn to face her, taking battle stances as they jumped backwards. Apologies, but I cannot let any of you leave alive. She placed her blade into the ground, a frost forming over the grass before the wind violently swirled ice picks forming in the air as the intense freezing wind tore and shredded the enemy soldiers as well as the one of the B-ranked shinobi that could not get under the other's earth dome in time. Breathing out a deep mist, she released the technique, allowing the last of the 3 shinobi to emerge. She gritted her teeth as she glanced around her surroundings. Quickly tallying them up, she swallowed. 80 lives I ended for what? She raised her blade to block one of the B-ranked shinobi's tanto. You killed good men, you bitch. He sent a kick to break the lock and she responded by backflipping. Landing with a flourish of her cloak, she swung her blade, causing the air to spin around her. She stabbed her blade into the ground 4 times, white ripple. Thrusting her sword forward, she extended her control and blew forward an intense current of freezing air and snow. The same shinobi jumped in front of his comrades and formed an earth wall to protect them. As they emerged, the earth wall shattered into hundreds of shards. They all prepared for the battle as a few samurai came after her. Throwing a blade in front of himself, one of the samurai attempted to slash her chest. She caught the blade with her own but had to give her ground when another blade came for her head. She pushed back but had to block a barrage of kunai. She breathed out and flashed forwards, gripping a samurai by his throat, freezing his windpipe and jugular, stopping his blood flow. 81. She flashed back and grabbed another by his sword arm, flipping over him and using his body as a shield for an incoming fireball which subsequently fried him. She blocked the blade of another samurai and kicked out his legs and spun over his prone body, slamming the tip of her blade through his neck. 83. She flourished her blade and sent a few ice stakes at a group of samurai, piercing through their cloth armor and killing them. 86. Turning to face the shinobi again after gaining some breathing room, she had the wind taken out of her by the A-rank nuke Nen. Fast, she tumbled rapidly back into a group of samurai. Stopping herself with her breath, she quickly sucked in a breath when she saw nearly 20 blades extended by chakra coming for her throat. Thinking fast, she used her blade already implanted in the ground and called out, "White Moon." Forming a massive pillar of ice around herself, she ended another 19. The ice shattered brilliantly and glimmered in the sunset. 105. She glared hatefully towards the armored nuke Nin. She readied her blade in challenge. She frowned, pained at the bloodshed. There was no need for words any longer. Blurring forward, he locked blades with Naruto. Gritting her teeth, she flashed away. Flanking to his left, she formed a hail of ice stakes and flashed to his right, attempting to lock him in. He burrowed behind her and she flipped mid-air to slam her blade into the ground. Extending her control, she spun the moisture in the air while lowering her temperature further to freeze it all and catch her own ice stakes, sending them back at his moving figure. He formed another earth dome to protect himself. She breathed out and gripped her chest. Her body was not used to these temperatures enough to handle them. Quickly ducking under another of the samurai's blade, she spun and slashed his chest and face before slamming her blade through his chest and flipped over his body to use it as a shield to another samurai's blade. His face twisted into a horrified, grief-stricken face. Taking advantage of the pause, she blurred around them both and snapped his neck. They both dropped to the ground and she turned her head to face the frowning shinobi. She simply moved over to her blade and drew it out of the mon's chest. Her blade and body now covered in blood. She stared apathetically at the armored nuke Nin and sighed. 107. He growled at her and the 2 other shinobi charged her. They moved towards her quickly and she turned her head to look at the last half of the samurai. She was tired. Incredibly tired. Chips of her skin were coming off due to her incredibly low temperature. She had to go on though. She raised her blade and moved to counter until she finally noticed. Naruto cracked a smirk and dashed forward, flipping over them and heading straight for the armored nuke Nen. The two B-rank shinobi stopped quickly and attempted to pursue, only to be stopped by a line of mirrors made of pure ice. In front of them a figure dropped down, a massive Zanpakuto held at her shoulder. "Sorry, we happen to be the cavalry." They looked at each other for a moment before the one on the left spoke. "We?" Haku, hidden behind her mask, tilted her head and pointed behind them. Before their eyes they watched over 900 samurai charge out of the tree line, charging into the already confused and decimated line of soldiers, and that caused their downfall. The samurai cut each and every one down with extreme prejudice, not stopping and only faltering at the few who held fair skill. Haku sighed and lifted her blade a bit, holding it out to point. "I would appreciate your surrender." They turned and snarled, "Like hell we would surrender. Die." As when they charged, the one on the left went through hand seals and formed a spear of lightning which he hastily threw, while the one on the right rolled along the ground and spewed out a decently sized fireball. Haku breathed out and raised a hand. Like water the mirrors formed and moved, forming a few to block the attacks with near no damage, and more poured out to surround them. She slowly stepped into the mirrors and bowed her head. "I regret to inform you both that I am in a situation where this must end quickly. I will try to make this as painless as possible." Haku hefted her sword and spread her image along the mirrors. Naruto clashed blades for the 100th time with this man. He was using a technique to expand his range of speed by at least 10 times and was managing to keep up with her. She ground her teeth. How can he keep up with me? It should be impossible for anyone under elite Jonin. She quickly flipped backwards, twirling in mid-air as she directed another barrage of ice stakes, and again he blurred out of her way. It seemed he was using chakra to do so. There are no signs of reishi in the air besides her own. She groaned as she exerted her control heavily. Gulping, she lowered her temperature even further. "Impressive, but I beg of you to stop this madness." She raised her blade in the air, calling forth a fierce maelstrom of ice and earth. She frowned and flexed her power out more, sensing the formation of a barrier in the middle of her storm. She focused intensely, coughing as she watched her skin attempt to flake off. She felt her chest ever so slowly constricting. She had to do this quick. It took almost 3 minutes and her blade was placed firmly into the ground. Her body leaning over the hilt, every cell in her body was fighting her, and at the moment anything more than this last attack was all she had left. She growled and raised her head. Slowly she readjusted her footing and straightened her spine. Gripping the hilt of her blade with deep determination, she drew the blade and rose it to the sky, and her eyes sharpened, the deep violet becoming brighter with power. Now here. The wind was released and it dispersed nearly instantly, and in its place a massive blade made entirely of ice, glimmering brightly with the sun reflecting off of the construction. "May you find release." She spoke with all but a whisper in respect. She slashed her blade down in front of her, and the blade was released from her control. Over 20 meters in length and 5 meters in width of highly sharpened crystal blade came down on his dome. And just as he released the technique, he stared the tip of the blade down, fear and confusion flashing through his eyes for just a moment before his entire body was split in 2 pieces. Finally, she dropped to her knees and stared the carnage down. Breathing out, her blade sealed in her hand. For just a moment she could almost hear a crack in her own mind. Looking upon the horrid sight she had wrought really put the whole situation she was in into perspective. She wanted to turn her head. She wanted to run from this reality. She wanted to scream and resist, but in her mind she knew. She understood that the path she is on is one that she must carve with her sword. She could not live peacefully yet. She could not live that life. She could not live the life she oh so wanted. She couldn't from the very moment she exited the womb. From the beginning. Being born to shinobi, to fighters. Being the bearer of this power. I was forced down this path. I never had a choice. This blood. The fear. The hate, the anger. I never had a choice. Why must I kill? Why must I end the lives of those who chase me? Who attack? Why am I banished to a fate so foul? Her eyes were wide, her heart nearly sinking as she looked at every detail of the mont's innards, his heart strewn a couple meters from his body, 2 halves of his brain still stuck to the remains of his skull. His intestines sprawled in numerous directions. his stomach leaking the disgusting clearish acid everywhere, and finally the horrid amount of blood that covered the area around him. She raised her blade in front of her, her hand shaking, causing the hilt to make a very quiet rattling noise, and looked over her hand and sword. So much blood. How many? How many was it? How many did I kill? Why? How many must I kill? How many must I wrest lives from? Naruto felt the pull into her mindscape, however she found something else. When she resisted, it was like she had no control over her body nor mind. When she finally could see again, she almost screamed. The entire landscape in front of her was wrong, twisted, the world was bathed in an oppressive reishi, coating the snow in unholy black. She turned time and time again looking for the entity in her mind that has this type of control. Then she finally saw before her, lowering from the sky, was an almost exact copy of herself. Bright green eyes, a smile plastered over her face, completely jet black hair in the exact same shoulder-length hair. Her cloak also mirrored the black color scheme. You must kill all who cross your blade, Tilda. Why would not want that? She giggled lightly. You're silly, Naruto, Tilda? Naruto stared deep into glowing green eyes. Stepping back, she trembled slightly. Where is Yuki-chan? The mirror image tilted her head. Oh, I remember now. You shut me out that long ago that you don't remember, huh? Shirayuki cannot entire my plane without permission. She ground the tip of her shoe into the ground as she pouted. Naruto narrowed her eyes. Who are you? She stepped back, lowering her hair that the left side of her hair slightly covered her face. We used to be one. Before you unlocked Yuki-chan and the day when father crossed the line. He never loved us, you know. She raised her head, her tone not matching her smile as she jumped a little, almost excitedly. Remember? We split. And we used to play. Naruto, I am Rika, Tilda? Naruto paced back in shock. No. Rika moved to the sand village. Rika is gone. Rika frowned for a moment before she perked back up. We were 4, we had ran around our dreamscape for hours and hours. We played board games and then played hide and seek with Yuki-chan. Naruto stared into the bright green eyes that almost screamed enjoyment. She felt a headache incoming and put her face in her hands. Running through the fields, a small little red head with hair about down to her mid-back. She ducked around the light but quick attempted taps by her almost identical black-haired copy. You won't tag me this time, Rika-chan, Tilda. Naruto, now a couple years older, blocked the strikes of Rika and counter-attacked with her own. We will become stronger. Rika responded in kind. For ourselves. For us. Naruto spun and attempted to strike her head, which was blocked as if it was expected. Shirayuki parried the two girls' sword techniques. You need to be faster. No one will ever be able to rely on you in this state. Naruto raised her blade and closed off the massive gates in her mindscape, constructing hundreds of barriers of ice in her mind to block the gate. Finally raising her hand to command massive chains to lock the gates. Her body and mind were racked. Cuts, bruises and gashes littered her body. Rika had tried to attack father. He had gotten drunk and was so angry. He wouldn't stop slamming their head into the ground. Then her vision went dark. She could only watch in horror as dark shades started to tear through her dark red hair. Rika had pulled her own blade and went to slash. It took all she had to wrest control away and get out before their father followed. It will become better soon. I just have to ignore it. Forget any of it happened. She tried to take control. She tried to run off and try to kill him. How could she not care about lives? No one deserves death. Right. Naruto looked back up into her eyes. Yes, Tilda, it's been 7 years now, I believe. We were 6 when you finally locked me away, Tilda, but it was odd. After all this time, something hurt you bad enough to loosen those shackles. Won't you keep me company for longer? Naruto growled and grasped her blade, drawing it from the sheath. Never. I will never let what happened before happen again. Rika giggled evilly. I never stopped training, Naruto, Tilda. Don't test your spiritual side, Tilda. Naruto blurred forward. I beat you once, I will beat you again. Rika simply grinned and an identical copy of Shirayuki appeared in her hand. She clashed blades and Rika, acting quickly, spun off the guard and kicked Naruto in the head, launching her into one of the many dead trees and across the black ice. Raising her blade high, she called with a grin, "Dance. Soda no Shirayuki." Instantly the hilt transformed along with the blade. She raised her spiritual pressure and coated it in her midnight reishi. Naruto skidded to a stop and released hers as well. I can't lose this. Dance. Both blurring forward towards each other and clashing blades again. Naruto countered her kicks and attacks with all she had. Despite them being almost perfect equals, she still felt a small difference between them. Rika held their lock for a good time before finally pushing off. We don't play the same games, Tilda. She waved her blade downwards and Naruto had a small stroke when she saw numerous ice copies of Yuki-chan coming straight for her. Twirling her blade quickly, she created a pillar of ice to form a barrier between them, successfully blocking the attack. She closed her eyes for a moment. Grant me strength. She exerted her control over her pillar and shattered it magnificently, letting the pieces fall for just a moment before twirling her blade and calling, "Third dance." White sword. Each of the small pieces immediately extended in a massive array of blades directed at her other half. Rika giggled wildly at the attack and twirled her own blade in kind, slamming the tip into the ground and whipping up a windstorm to counter the attack. The blade's small stature could not handle the fierce winds and shattered beneath them. Just when the winds calmed, Naruto was forced on guard, blocking the blade of a profusely giggling Rika. I still wish you were on my side, Tilda. Pushing off, Rika slid to the ground and slashed at her ankles. Naruto flipped over the attack and stabbed at the ground to try and impale her. Rika blocked the blade with that ever-present grin on her face. I would have loved for us to cut down that abusive man together, Tilda. Naruto let out an angry scream as she pulled her blade back and gripped it with two hands, swinging it down, forcing all of her power into strength. Shut up. The ground quaked from the impact of blade on blade and Rika quickly blurred back and away. Every life matters. He was a piece of shit to us. I understand, but even so we left. I left. He no longer matters to us anymore, so stop complaining. Rika seemed to drop her grin for a moment. You don't remember, do you? That day that I was born. Naruto seemed very confused. Rika lowered her head and what looked almost like a tear fell. She continued to talk. He locked us inside the house. They had left for a trip to the sand village. He forgot about us and sealed the compound closed. We starved for almost 3 weeks. No part of the house was escapable. No food, barely any water. We banged on the doors and windows for hours and hours by the second week. Do you remember? Merely 4 days before he returned? Naruto's eyes widened for a moment and another headache seemed to come on. Her head felt like it was throbbing as she dropped her blade and held her head. Naruto wobbled almost deliriously through the upstairs halls of the house. She was starving. They had left no food in the house that she could make. She was barely 4 years old. Although she was practicing as best she could in fighting, she had no experience in cooking, so the little in the house that could possibly be edible was useless to her. Her parents had forgotten her on their trip to the hidden sand village, leaving her in a sealed closed compound to starve for what seemed like years in her young mind. She had water from the tap but nothing to eat for upwards of 2 weeks. She wobbled towards the stairs, her vision blurring slightly from the lack of energy and carbs. Finally reaching the railing of the stairs, she leaned forward to grab the rail, but in the moment her hand reached out, her vision blurred further. Her hand slipped and she was sent clattering down the stairs, head and body slamming into each and every stair and wall on the way down. By the time she woke up, it was almost an hour after it happened and she was laying in a pool of her own blood. She stared in horror as she looked upon the wound she had received. Her femur was sticking out of her thigh and blood was crusting around it. She let out a loud blood-curdling scream in terror at the wound and steadied herself on the wall behind her, thinking as quick as she could, and took all of her understanding of cleaning wound and the like she threw over her options. She blinking and steadied her breathing as best as possible. She looked towards her father's liquor cabinet and thought things over for a few moments before deciding. She turned and started scouting backwards towards the cabinet, dragging her limp bottom half as best she could. When she finally reached her destination, she reached over and drug a step stool towards her. The cabinet was locked but the front was glass. This was all she could do. She lowered the stool and swung it back into the glass cabinet, shattering the glass atop her. She shielded her eyes as best she could and finally looked back into the cabinet. She saw a few different bottles and simply took the first one off the shelf. A very old bottle of whiskey. Quickly pulling the cork off the bottle, she dumped a good chunk of the bottle over the wound. She bit down on the cork and let out a loud scream through her teeth. She stared at the bottle and took a moment to think again. She knew what alcohol did. She watched her father and mother drink all the time and knew that drunks pretty much never felt pain. She also knew it was very bad for her health, especially at her age. But at the moment she really did not care. She spat the cork from her mouth and brought the bottle to her lips and took a big swig. She hissed at the taste and the burn, but within a couple minutes she felt her pain dull slightly and her vision blur a little more. She could still feel the wound though, and she did not like that, so she took another longer swig from the bottle. And leaned back for a moment, letting the warm feeling wash over her. She leaned back forwards and ripped a few shreds from her shirt and bundled one up and shoved in her mouth. Glancing down at the wound she cringed. She didn't know where the bone was to reset it. Therefore she had to find it. She bit down on the cloth and shoved her index finger into the wound. Letting out a strangled scream. She felt around for a few moments as she looked for it. A few tears fell from her eyes as she dug her finger through her own flesh. The pain was absolutely incredible. Even with the numbing sensation of the alcohol, she still felt an immense amount of pain from the wound. Finally she felt the jagged hard piece of bone in her leg. And let out a sigh as she pulled her finger out. Hardening herself, she firmly pressed down on the bone still stuck out of her leg and pushed down hard on it, shoving it back into its place inside her body. She just kept pushing and pushing no matter how much pain was sent through her body. She let out sob after sob as she choked back on the cloth in her mouth and bit down harder. Finally she pushed the bone back into place and she dug her finger back into the wound to make sure that the bone was back into a place that was aligned with the jagged chunk she felt. When she finally got it right on place, she glanced over to the dining room chairs and pulled one over. Tugging it close, she hefted up the piece of furniture and slamming it back on the ground. Pieces broke off, but not what she wanted. Using what was left of her very limited amount of strength, she hefted it back up and slammed it down again, finally getting one of the legs to break off. She sighed in relief as she pulled the chair leg over and started pulling more and more shreds off of her shirt. She dumped more of the whiskey along her leg and let out another choked scream before she started tying them together to form a long rope-like bandage. She wrapped up the wound before pouring more alcohol on the area the wound is under the bandage, and then placed the chair leg along her leg and continued wrapping. Finally she looked at her work with half-lidded eyes. The bleeding was pretty bad, but with all the work put in, she just may have saved herself. She looked at the bottle in her hand. A small bit left inside. She shrugged. She had already drank some, might as well finish it off. She tilted it back and drank the last bit before leaning back and staring up at the ceiling. So, this is all I am worth. Huh. Naruto sat on her knees, tears pooling out of her eyes as she stared at Rika. Rika slowly lowered herself down and stared into Naruto's eyes. The day I was born was 4 days after that. Remember that? Naruto had just woken up a couple hours beforehand. After the traumatic experience and the pain as well as the lack of nourishment, she had no clue what to do. She still felt immense pain in her leg and could barely walk. She had grabbed a walking stick that had been by the door for years and used that to walk. She was chugging down a huge glass of water when her eyes widened at the sound of the door opening and the sound of her brother chattering their parents' ears off. She suddenly had a huge spike of fear when she glanced back at the mess she had made in her desperation. There was glass and blood everywhere. And when she looked back towards the foyer, she saw her father, Minato Namikaze, with the most angry look she has ever seen. His eyes seemed like a fire was burning behind them. Like a bomb he went off without warning. I leave you alone for a couple weeks and you destroy the house, break into the liquor cabinet and drink my booze. That is it. He stomped towards her, his eyes not even taking notice of her makeshift stint. She had backed away in fear, her feeble cane fumbling as she tried to move backwards, and she quickly lost balance, falling back into the floor. Her legs sending waves of intense pain through her. She let out a scream of agony before her father wrenched her up by her neck and pinned her against the wall. How dare you do this to this family's house? From the moment you were conceived you were always such a terror. She scratched and pawed at his arm in terror from the lack of oxygen, but her malnutritioned body posed little threat to the sulfur monosulfide ranked Hokage feared throughout the nations. She choked as he gripped her neck and tossed her into the shards of broken glass, tearing at her mostly exposed back due to the barely existent shirt she was wearing. He stomped forwards menacingly before slowing to a stop when Kushina and Kento rolled around the corner. He glanced over, his anger draining a little, and she quickly took her opportunity. The doors were unlocked and she could get out. She struggled to her feet and quickly grabbed the cane she was using to fumble out one of the doorways and make her way around the group. She heard talking and a little yelling. No one seemed concerned about her though. She even heard the words, "Terror Spawn," from Kushina as she fumbled out the doors and out the gates at an impressive speed for someone in a stint. It took her a good few minutes to get away from the compound and around the corner, and like the world had a vendetta on her, her wooden cane snapped and she toppled to the ground. She let out for what seemed the 100th time a ear-shattering scream as she fell right on her wounded leg and broke the splint and possibly dislodged the bone again. This time luck seemed to be on her side. An Anbu agent, Monkey, dropped down to the buildings above and picked her up. He looked over the injuries and assessed her quickly. She has a broken leg and bandages, looks like they were sealed by untrained hands with limited materials. Multiple lacerations along the back and glass shards still embedded. She needs immediate medical attention to save the leg and keep her from bleeding out. Without a word he jumped back up to the rows and started moving. Naruto stared up at the mask, finally, a small amount of relief washing over her. But in the back of her mind whispered something terrible. It is only his fault. Our father did this to us. None of this would have happened if he did what he does for Kento. He is so worthless, he never cared. He never will care. He is just incredibly pathetic. The words barely registered though, because Naruto was barely in the world of the living at this point. Her eyes felt heavy and her body cold. She just wanted to sleep. She slowly closed her eyes and let herself fall to the world, to help or not. She just didn't care at this point.
That's all for now. If you want to see next part, then please like this video and subscribe my channel. Thank you.